I hope you can hear me. Uh, Good morning, Americas. Good evening, Africa. Good night, India, Asia. We are very, very happy to welcome you today to this event. For those who are joining us for the first time, my name is Armando Ali. I am the CEO for PAL Network. This big family extended widely in the world, from Americas, Africa to Asia. We are very happy to have you today because today we are marking a very important milestone towards our biennial conference. As some of you already know, PAL Network organizes every 2 years a conference where we invite members, partners, researchers, and donors, and we discuss issues related to education. And we learn from experiences from our members. And we also define the way we want to follow in the future. Those conferences are spaces not only for learning, but also to voice our desires to a world where all children can learn and thrive. This year's conference will happen in November, and our member organizations, Uwezo Tanzania and the Facilidad in Mozambique, are organizing this conference. The theme for the conference is Building Better, Ensuring Learning Continuity for All. And this journey, as I said before, have started some months ago. And today we decided to have a pre-conference, and the pre-conference will convene PAL members to start the discussion of the main conference. So the main conference is organized in 4 different sub-teams. Sub-team 1 is children learning and their well-being. Under this sub-theme, we underline the education crisis attributed to the COVID-19 pandemic that has cemented the need to reevaluate access to education, quality, inclusion, and equity. And we have received several presentations, several teams to discuss this specific topic. And we also have the sub-team number 2, which is language, culture, and learning. Under this sub-team, we know that it's well documented that children learn better in their mother tongue or the language with which they feel most comfortable. So we also opened a space for researchers, practitioners to bring their topics regarding the theme of language, culture, and systems, learning, and technology. Under the third sub-system, learning and technology, papers will explore how education systems have responded to a building bottom of the pyramid. So we also have received very interesting topics that will guide our reflections on how the systems can respond to current crisis we are all living on. And finally, a 4th theme, scaling and the role of partnership. Civil society organizations hold the institutions to account, support positive humanitarian change, and supply subject matter expertise. So under this theme, we will discuss the role of partnership and especially linkages between civil society organizations, development partners, and government agencies to see how can we collectively respond to the challenges we are facing, not only those who are emerging from the pandemic, but the challenge we are facing in the education sector has solved. So this is in general the overview of the main conference that we are planning to hold in very few weeks. And this conference of today will start that conversation, as I said before, exploring topics aligned with these 4 areas. I will hand over to the chair of this organizing committee, Virginia, to guide us into the specific discussions for today and to see how we are going to revigorate our discussions in this topic. As I said before, I'm very happy to have you here. I know by experience that the discussions will be very hot. I encourage you to bring all your thoughts, your comments, and to learn from others' experiences. Thank you all for coming, for joining, and I wish you all a very interesting discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, our CEO, Armando, for very good summary there around, what's bothering all of us. And looking at the team that has joined us today for this pre
Virginie, we have lost
the conversation starter, the buried or
yes.
For that very good introduction into today's session. And members, mine is to briefly also share that, as Armando alluded to, this today is just at the beginning of conversations which we have for 3 days around the 4 sub-themes. And within the PAL network, 2 definitive areas that mark our work, one of them being assessment and the other part being action. And there is no better time to discuss action than now, because we saw what happened last year when schools closed and the spaces that are so popularly associated with learning were closed indefinitely. Nobody knew till when. And of course, the response was for governments, civil societies to adapt and embrace remote learning to see whether this could be an alternative. On the other side is that this has made a crisis worse that was already there before COVID, and this is the challenge of low foundational literacy and numeracy skills. So as we converge here today, really, members, is to ask ourselves, how can we, even as we rethink action, even as we build back better, others are talking about reimagining education, how do we bring into this space our thoughts, our experiences in order to learn and create actions or responses that will yield more resilience within our education systems, systems that can thrive even in the face of crisis, or even in the face of certain shocks, be they political shocks, natural shocks. So when such emergencies come to us, how can we ensure that our children continue to learn without really exposing them to the risks of losing even that which they had acquired? So in today's discussion, we are joined by different members. We will be discussing a total of 9 papers that will help dissect these issues and guide us into understanding more from an experience perspective from members of diverse contexts on what have we learned, what is working, and what can we take home as we reconsider or as we think our education systems. So allow me at this juncture then to introduce to us what the flow will be. So we are going to have 3 main sessions, so to speak. So there's this plenary session where we shall be listening to a number of presenters discussing about 4 papers. And that session will be chaired by one of our very own, Dr. Mo, a professor from TEP Center in Nigeria. And we'll, after this plenary, we'll then move into 2 breakout sessions. And the first breakout session will be chaired by Dr. Raj, who is also the Director of Programs at the People's Action for Learning Network. And the second breakout room chaired by Mr. Saeed Ahmed from Bangladesh. So that's the lineup of events. But to start us off, I would like to invite our first session chair to introduce to us her session, to introduce to us the presenters and the papers that we shall be discussing, and also invite the presenters in their assigned 10 or so minutes to be able to take us through what experiences, what evidence do they have, and we can further engage with them as an audience. So feel free to make your chat and also keep your comments, reflections, or your questions coming. So over to you, Dr. Ray. Mo, if you can hear us.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mo Adefesola-Teju, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this session. I hope filled in nicely, and we are gearing up for session and a most beneficial conference for us all. So it is my pleasure to introduce the speakers for this particular session. Just bear with me a second. I'm just going to pull that up. Sorry, could somebody send me the agenda again? Maybe by WhatsApp or by Zoom?
Is this screen sharing?
Yes, please. I'm going to have multiple documents here. Great, thank you very much. And so we're going to have 4 papers presented during this session. And I'm going to run us very quickly through the papers of those 4 sessions. We're going to have a discussion after these sessions as well, after the presentations, and that will lead us up until 4:50 p.m. And from that time up until 5:25 p.m., we're also going to have an opportunity for some questions and for some answers so that everyone feels part of this session. Our first session paper is Assessment for All, an approach to make learning visible for all. The authors of the paper are Vikram Guria from the ASA Center, Deepali Kapoor from Pratham Education Foundation, and they will be represented on this session for this presentation by Vikram Guria. The second paper is a capabilities response to the design and delivery of remote learning for the most educationally marginalized children during COVID-19. The authors are Harold Kumbola, Link Education Malawi, Kate Sykes, and Amanda Ross, Link Education International. Our third paper is going to be focused on the motivation and reactivation of basic learning in times of pandemic, a blended learning case in a global South region. The authors are Edith Mendez Olarte and Carlos Guillermo Rosales Mendez from the MIA, Mexico. And our fourth paper is focused on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on access and learning. The authors are Waka Simran and Sahar Saeed from ITA in Pakistan. Each of our presenters is going to have 10 minutes to make their presentation. And after they have each made a presentation, we will then go into our questions and answers. So paper one, I'd like to now welcome Vikram Guria from the ASA Center to make the first paper presentation, Assessment for All.
Thank you, everyone, and my greetings to all present on this platform. So, without just in the sense to get and align to the time limits, I would just jump into the presentation of the work that we did. I mean, this is the work that we started with. So ASA Center is a research vertical for Pratham Education Foundation. So we jointly started this project in 2019, and it culminated just before the COVID. So we just wanted to share you the learnings or probably the experiences that we have had. So to start with a nudge is the first statement. If you right now try to Google something around learning levels of children with disability, or if you just want to inquire how many children with disability cannot read simple text or do simple maths, it will be really hard to find the data. And while we are speaking, you can just give it a try. But the future is not grim. As you see, globally we have a consensus and a promise in SDG 4 in SDG goals to meet by 2030, and very promisingly, SDG 4 targets do mention inclusion of most vulnerable population, and definitely people with disabilities is a inclusion of those people is a part of that mandate. So the first hurdle is solved, that yes, we acknowledge that there is a problem. Now comes the good thing that we are all holding hands, but what exactly is the challenge? Now, if the world is hit by the COVID pandemic for like last 1.5, 2 years. So many estimates that all the work that we did, this COVID has taken us 20 years back, unfortunately. If we focus on the small population of children with disabilities, then the data global monitoring report suggests that the children with disabilities or learners with disability are 19% less likely to achieve those foundational learning levels. So these are just two glaring aspects of the problem that we wanted to bring forth. Even if we do business of as usual, even if there was no COVID, still 20% children, most children with disabilities are less likely to complete their foundational education or be at the minimum proficiency level. Now, the next aspect is that what causes this? Many of you might practice in this domain, but just for everyone, we wanted to just pull in a couple of bullet points in the sense what exactly are these barriers to inclusive education. So definitely the first point is the policy and the legislation, in the sense that many countries still have special other schools for children with disabilities versus a global mandate of having an inclusive physical environment. The second is obviously attitudinal barriers, and it may come from parents, teachers, even as practitioners. And attitudinal barriers are not limited just to disability, but even to ethnicity, language, religion, and many other things. The third is the accessibility. When we take a use case of India, right now there is at least one primary school in every village. That's a good sign. But if we look deeper into what facilities are available in those schools, then the picture changes completely. In the sense, the spaces are not inclusive, especially for the learners with disability, in terms of ramps, accessible classrooms, seating arrangement, and so on and so forth. Uh, the fourth, the main criteria, the main thing that children interact with is whatever the teaching materials, the curriculum. In philosophy, in India, we have seen that the policymakers do mandate things to make inclusive, but they are not really in practice. So hence, there is a need to relook at the teaching materials, curriculum, and pedagogy in the way that teacher interact with children, or probably what pedagogical approaches do they take. So I mean that's another barrier to this small population. And the finally assessments, that the yes, as Assess Center we do roll out a yearly systemic assessment of all children along all districts, nearly 6 lakh villages. But that also, I mean, has a limitations in terms of time and budget, and hence, I mean, we don't really have data on learning levels of children. And even the international assessments like PISA, PEARLS tend to, I mean, there isn't enough support for their participation. And if we look at this exclusion, that why do children become invisible, then probably there are like 4 contributing factors. One is definitely that their voices are not heard because our programs, the data collection programs, do not keep children with disability or learners with disability at the focal point. Second is that the data is not representative of all the voices. So we might just include children with physical disability, and then the cognitive disability, children with cognitive disability might be missed out. So that's another thing. While reporting, since the population of children with disabilities is around between 1 and 2%, usually their voices are left out from the main findings or the reports. And obviously, the inclusion processes are more aligned to the majority, in the sense that what are the basic inclusion processes that would at least include some of the children with disability, but not really all. So that's those are, I mean, the problem that we wanted to highlight, in the sense what exactly is the problem, the scale of the problem. Now, starting from these problem statements, we tried to take up a project of making learning visible for all, which means that we tried to build an assessment tool that would include all children and test them on foundational literacy, numeracy, and problem solving. So yes, that was the core purpose of the assessment kit that we started to design in 2019. We wanted to include all children with the special focus on children with disabilities. We wanted the tool to be used in many places. Hence, I mean, it could be used at the start of an academic session or once in a year, just to check the growth in children or how the children are doing or learners are doing. Ideally, we wanted that to have an inclusive approach. Hence, this assessment toolkit was designed to be implemented in households, so that the other designs of community-led assessments are not left out. So just adding one more layer of including children with disabilities. So all the philosophy of citizen-led assessments were intact. We wanted it to be used by everyone. Hence, there should not be barrier even to adoption of these. So hence, I mean, the processes in terms of administration, in terms of data recording, all these things were taken into account while designing those. And why to assess? The answer goes back to the first slide, that we don't have enough evidence about the learning levels of especially children with disabilities. So that was the reason this toolkit was developed, and that is the reason we intend that it should serve. Quickly, we go to the framework in the sense what do we assess in these in this toolkit. So yes, this was built from our learning from this citizen-led assessment and the ASSER tool that most of the countries, developing countries, use. So on the left-hand side, we see literacy and language development components that are part of the assessments. Uh, if I have to simplify how we came to the framework, the philosophy behind it is rather simple. Uh, Children with disabilities do progress in their learning, but those progress, the incremental progress, is very minute. So the levels of progress that you might see might be a bit slower, or probably might be minute. So we wanted to have enough levels in this assessment tool so that those progress can be measured for. Hence, as I told you, that this is built on a ASSER framework, which has a beginner, letter, word, para, story as levels. So within those levels, there are some granular levels that we have added so that we can track the progress of children as they move ahead in their quest for foundational competence. Similarly, in maths, there is a lot of things that Global Proficiency Framework specifies, and even the minimum proficiency level of UIS has some recommendations. We just wanted to have a holistic picture of children's development in terms of in the number concept, in various other content areas in math. Hence, the math competencies that are included in our tool are more exhaustive and serve as a complete profiling for children with disabilities as they move in their learning path. So this is what we test in assessment for all. What now the final thing that we come to is that what is the key philosophy of developing this tool? Why didn't we use other academic tools that are available out there? So we approached this problem with a lens of universal design for learning, and what it says is that children with disabilities or any marginalized section, vulnerable section, should be presented with enough support so that they are able to showcase their abilities. It's about showcasing their abilities to their maximum extent. Hence, if we simplify it, that how anyone can make their modules inclusive, it's basically just three segments to it. One is that the representation or the presentation of either teaching or assessment has to have some accommodations based on the child's level or the child's level of functioning. The second is that the ways in which child can express their learning, that should have some accommodations. So, I mean, this is pretty much simple. The third is, obviously, it comes to the caregiver or the teacher, that they should have enough opportunities to apply individualized approaches as they meet various learners, be their age or ethnicity or learning levels, or even various disabilities that child or the learner is with. So these are the three approaches, or probably three dimensions of those approaches, that has been successful for us in developing this toolkit. In the bottom, you can we wanted cost friendly. So I mean, it comes around $5 per kit. That's the cost. So in the first snippet that you see is a lot of all cards with for children with vision kit of the
I'm
purpose
so sorry, Ikram. I think we need to round. I think we've 5 minutes. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. So, final slide.
Vikram, I think you've really shone the light on an important aspect of inclusion, thinking not just about children with disabilities that most people are familiar with, but those with even more hidden disabilities as well. And I hope we have the opportunity to interrogate this a bit more during the question and answer session. The second paper is going to be presented. I'd like to welcome Harold Kombola from Link Education Malawi, and the title of your paper is a Capabilities Response to the Design and Delivery of Remote Learning for the Most Educationally Marginalized Children During COVID-19. If you can stick to the 10 minutes allocation, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair of the session, and hello to everyone. As you have heard, I'm Harold Kombola from Link Education. I'm based in Malawi. Would want to share with you about our experiences of rights-based education programming that takes account of girls' multiple identities, how we delivered during COVID-19, and looking into the future. Apologies, I didn't try my video. I think I'm on the low network and it's not working well. I'll be sharing from a project, Transformation Empowerment for Marginalized Adolescent Girls, Team Girl, Malawi. It was established in 2018 under Leave No Girl Behind program. We support marginalized girls aged 10 to 19 who have never been to school or who dropped out without gaining functional literacy and numeracy. The project aim is to significantly improve participants' learning outcomes and enable them to transition to education, training, employment, improved learning, and life chances. We are working in 40 communities across 3 districts, targeting 4,800 young people who are currently enrolled. The first part around our program is that once a learner is selected into the program, their characteristics are entered into our database, which provides us with the data on the learning profile or the learning picture of our learners. So this enables us to see the prevalence of particular characteristics and to design project interventions that can address the associated barriers. The young people enrolled in the project face multiple barriers to their learning, including disability, extreme poverty, high household core burdens, work, marriage, pregnancies, childcare, and breastfeeding, just to mention some. All of our learners have got experienced lived poverty situations. 32% are orphans, about 17% have children, about 13% are married, and around 12% have some form of a disability. We apply a capability approach, which is very useful here, as it helps us to understand how learners' multiple identities intersect to create education marginalization, rather than looking at each one of them in isolation. So a disability is one among the many identities that we have to consider when we are creating a rights-based project that works for all learners equally. Team Girl project receive complementary basic education classes to support them acquire functional literacy and numeracy, which is delivered 5 days in a week over a 2-hour period. Applying a capability approach, the project aims to holistically tackle or respond to the various holistic multiple education barriers faced by participants and our learners. So there we are presenting a table that shows some of the learning profiles from our database and how the project was designed to support them. To look at the issue of household property, we have partnered with others to provide for food rations in terms of need, but also to support the parents and guardians with skills to earn an income to reduce labor demands at the household, freeing up time for every learner to learn. But also our learners being those with children, being young mothers themselves, in our learning centers we provide a child care corner and provide breaks, allowing them to attend to learners, breastfeeding during break time, in an aim to balance off motherhood and learning. But also recognizing that some of our learners would miss school because either themselves or their children are sick. There are self-study materials which have been designed to support them study at their own period, at their own time to catch up, but also for home practice at their own free time. And being young mothers, we also recognize that oftentimes they are less than 18 years and therefore survivors of some form of child abuse. And therefore, we are in a partnership that also provides psychosocial counseling to support them deal with this. One of the critical learning outcomes we are working on is sexual reproductive health and rights, basically to support them acquire skills around correct decision making when it comes to adolescence, gender, and their living conditions. Tackling harmful social cultural practices within homes is a really critical piece that we are also working on, and it's challenging, ensuring that everyone else within the community is supporting our learners and ensuring that harmful cultural practices are also dealt with, and therefore community engagement becomes key to be part of the programming. But also putting the child rights at the center of our programming is very, very important. Learners, partnerships with local disability organizations is another key thing to ensure that we work with disability specialists in assessing our learners and providing the required assistive support for them. Just tackling a disability alone is not enough, but also tackling the other impairments and barriers that come because a person is disabled becomes key, and therefore a twin track approach that we use is critical here, ensuring that a learner is supported fully. Within the COVID-19 period, towards the beginning of COVID-19, as you might also be aware, schools closed, and therefore learning went through distance learning through technology. We conducted a rapid assessment, and through our rapid assessment to understand access to technology, out of those whom we contacted, only 12% had a working phone. And access to radio was at 44%, but 41% would use it. And access to learning materials within home, more than 50% of them didn't have learning materials. And even those who had learning materials, they weren't having learning materials for all subjects. And therefore, this led to us to conclude that we needed to work on some form of a modified, community-led face-to-face learning during COVID-19 as an effective way of reaching out to every marginalized person. So that rapid assessment study led us to a community-led approach, that is study circles, which is being delivered at the community level. And it's being delivered on a ratio of 15 learners to 1 facilitator. The subject content for home learning approach was reduced from 7 to 4 to allow prioritizing on resilience and social emotional skills as the foundation for learning. The teachers were also supported to adapt the core curriculum to the individual learning needs and build them towards focusing on attaining literacy and numeracy. As most learners spent time at home during the COVID-19 period, we developed home learning materials to provide continuity of learning, but also a chance for learners to practice within their homes. This went along with learner and facilitator reflection journals to enable us attain assessment of the learners in terms of acquisition of the subject content. And follow-ups that were made revealed that out of those whom we contacted, 95% found that the content was very useful and that the teaching was good and the home learning materials were of good quality. And 75% responded that they felt they were making progress even though schools were closed within that period. Looking ahead for the opportunities in the future, the Team Girl project aims to consider more significantly how learners' multiple identities affect their potential to attain a life of their choice in future. We have noted that the self-study, the study cycle materials, the home learning provides a strong learning opportunity for every learner to acquire literacy and numeracy to change their lives and live a life of their choice. So that is one key area we would be looking to provide more on. But also this is centered on the quality of a teacher to provide community-led teaching, and therefore continuous professional teacher development facilitators is critical in ensuring that there is quality in what they are delivering at the community study cycle level. Changing teaching environments also requires teachers to have the necessary teaching skills to be able to adapt to various teaching methodologies. It is also important not to discount the data in what we are getting from these subgroups and learners with marginalities, but instead of just relying on the numbers to make decisions, we aim to empower the facilitators to also work with the girls and respond to each of them as individuals and addressing the unique barriers each one of them faces. Each learner has a unique challenge, and therefore meeting them in their individual needs is critical. Hence, embedding the inclusive education approach at all levels becomes very critical. The best fruits of the years dedicated to learning are best captured in transformative nature, moving from marginalized conditions to living a life of their choice. So the post-CBE years supporting a transition is critical in ensuring that a learner attains the best from the investment made in the project. So going ahead, we will be looking at those 4 areas to strengthen with our learners, study cycles, embedding them, but also inclusive education and supporting the post-CBE years for a learner to live a life of their choice. So thanks so much for your attention. I'm looking forward to any questions and discussing more with you at the end of the presentations. And you can also get in touch with me. Those are my contact details. Thank you so much, Chair.
Great. Thank you so much, Harold. That was a very interesting sharing of how it is that you facilitated different ways, in which we could adapt learning opportunities for children, and also rethinking how teachers and facilitators support that process. I'm especially drawn to the importance of evidence in thinking about how you facilitated those adoptions, those adaptations. The questions are pouring in, and that's very exciting because it means that we're all very super engaged, in this session. So thank you very much, Harold, for sharing from your paper. I would encourage us to keep the questions coming. We are picking them up, we are recording them, and once we get into the question and answer session, we'll be able to take a deeper dive into these. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Edith Mendez Olarte from MIA, Mexico. And she's going to be presenting the work they have done, the motivation and reactivation of basic learning in times of pandemic. A blended learning case in a global South region. So, will this be Edith presenting?
Sí. Claro que sí. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
So, experience that we're going to share with you, Carlos and myself, it is based specifically in in a municipality in Veracruz State in Mexico, where we want to share with you what was the experience, what were the results that we received in this educational innovation that we implemented during the COVID-19. Next slide, please. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon to each and every one of you. The aim of our presentation is to be able to talk about all the potentials and talking about the different dimensions of innovations that we can not just develop but also replicate um, on medium term, and also talk about some of the difficulties that we have faced, and especially thinking about the context where we were working in our country. Between March and July of 2020, just like everybody else, we were affected in Mexico in the educational field. And so we had to bridge the digital divide, which was an obstacle as we had to change the way children were learning. And so some of the panels have already talked about what happened, and well, we've talked about the loss of learning during the pandemic, the lack of communication between teachers and students, and so we've talked about the emotional effects, isolation, lockdowns, confinements, and how it affected the children in a brutal way. And the children stopped going to school when the schools were closed. In Mexico, schools were closed in the month of March. And the last is school term. That is when we, as an educational project in coordination with the municipal government, we thought about how we would put together some interventions that would allow us to be able to support these children who had stopped going to school and or who are about to leave the school system or who found themselves in a disadvantaged position. And so, because before the schools were closed, did not even have a technology, did not have a connection to the internet. And so the question was key. The key question was how to reactivate and motivate children's learning without putting their health at risk. And so we had to follow the protocols that were established by the government in dealing with the pandemic. And so, in order to respond to this question, that's why we designed the what you call reactivating learning, with the aim of be able to help those who are falling behind to catch up, especially in reading and mathematics for children and adolescents, for third up, beginning from the third grade going up, and also to deal with emotional effects which are the result of the pandemic and the safety measures. And so in the innovation, we put together, we adapted these activities. And so we came up as MIA with these innovative activities, and we came up with what you call a hybrid approach, which put together the independent work through guided instruction, as well as instruction using audio methods, and talking about teaching at the right level. And so we designed 3 guides for reading and 3 guides for mathematics. And the work that was done through the guides was and follow up to activities where spaces of government for one to where we went to children's homes, children who lived in where they did not have access to technology, but they still wanted to continue learning. And so for this work, we were able to synergize our work because we had cooperation between the municipal government, MIA team, as well as the participation of Veracruz students. And those students were monitors who did the follow-up of these children. And so every monitor had at least 10 children that they were following up using these follow-up methods that I've just presented. And so we had different methods and different steps. So we had from the design to the implementation. And so every one of them had a peculiar way of working. But there are 3 steps which we consider to be very important and where we saw potential. First of all, the training of the monitors. We had to come up with a training method for them, and we had to come up with a new methodology and new platforms, new strategies, new tools for those who were going to work with, who we call the monitors. And so we had interactive ways of communicating, preparation of forms that could be filled out. And up to today, we continue to use the same approaches, what you call home office long distance approach. And so this is one of the most important points that we noted. The second important point was because of the adverse situations that we found ourselves, and we had to look for new strategies to reach the children who would participate. And so with the monitors who went from place to place, looking for the children who we're calling participants, confirming their participation in the innovation project. And that helped us to not just to implement new strategies, but we are also able to sensitize the children. We established links between the monitors and the children, and those helped a lot, and it helped us to have more engagement it helped us to improve educational participation during a time
Ça a
of
beaucoup été. Donc, lors du temps de la pandémie.
I think there's a French coming in. And so this field experience enabled us to show that we can follow health protocols, but at the same time continue with the learning process. And so we discovered new forms of presenting information to the participants. And so with a variety of implementation, we were able to incorporate new strategies, and also be able to achieve our main objective, which is to learn. And that brought us results which we had never had before through any other kind of innovation. Now, talking about the results, we had qualitative and quantitative results. Now, talking about the quantitative results, we're talking about basic learning. Most of the children were able to move up one level. And so, generally speaking, 61% of the participants improved in their reading. And so, that is to say, those who could not read or could not understand when they read were able to improve. And so, we had some children who before had not achieved any progress in the first evaluation that we had carried out when we started off with this innovation. So they are part of the 61%. Talking about mathematics, 43% of the children achieved a lot of progress in mathematics. What's interesting here is that in this experience, working from home, using these guides, workbooks, the children were able to improve their independent working skills to achieve this result. And so going over to the qualitative results, we are able to measure the satisfaction for the work that we're able to achieve. Talking to the parents and our guardians, they showed more responsibility when it came to the learning process of the children, and children learned how to work in groups, and they were able to find energy working together. And the work that this work also helped them to have what you call emotional. They were able to find some emotional strength, and they were able to share amongst themselves in small groups, and or even when looking at screens or when we were teaching through WhatsApp, they were able to find their emotional strength. So one of the conclusions that we draw from this experience is on the importance of cooperation between different sectors and actors who are involved, organizations, civil society organizations, local government, as well as the general citizenry. We found out that in spite of the prevailing situation, it's still possible for children to work with children, but it works better when there's collaboration. And one of the results that made us think a lot, especially in the Mexican case, is we continue to have a resistance to the hybrid approaches of learning when it's in different areas, and because they're still rooted in Mexico. Many people feel that you only learn when you go to school. The school is the place where people go to acquire knowledge. So we found out that it is something that we still have to work on to fight this resistance, maybe sensitize them more so that we can have new ways of thinking when it comes to learning in our communities. Something else to add on to what Carlos was saying, we consider that it is going to be very wise of us to sensitize the general population on these points, so that they can understand that you can learn from other spaces and in other situations. And something else that we consider to be a recommendation is that in the same way, we need to recognize and accept the fact that traditional educational learning systems have changed, and it's necessary to consolidate this change in thinking and think about how we can improve the new educational learning systems. And we need to come up with strategies and tools and applications so that we can be able to fit into the new ways of learning. And we continue to have in the general educational population, there's still this idea that distant learning does not work. However, yes, you get to learn, especially when the means of learning are adapted to long distance learning. And so we need to think about that, because we continue to have vulnerable populations that can still not get any education going on. And we in Mexico, schools have reopened now, but based on the visits that we had in the schools, we found out that there's so many difficulties that exist for the children, for them to be able to achieve 100% participation, in-person participation in schools. And so we cannot forget social emotional education. It is equally important, just like normal curricular-based learning. And finally, we need to strengthen the collaboration links between the different entities that are involved in the learning process, persons, citizens, authorities. Everybody needs to participate so that we can improve the learning of our children. Thank you very much.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for that excellent presentation, Idis. Talking through, how you distributed learning guides to children, the design, the implementation, the follow-up processes, and even the results that you saw in terms of the improvements, in English and in math. There are a few questions for you, which we will delve into, during the Q&A session. Thank you so much for that excellent presentation, which I think we all found very, very enlightening. Without further ado, we're going to move over to our fourth presenter. Again, I'm just going to implore you to please try and keep to the 10 minutes time allocation so that we can have time. I'd like to welcome Wakas Imran at this point in time from ITA in Pakistan, speaking about their paper on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on access and learning. Wakas?
Hello everyone, this is Vakas from ITA Pakistan. Today I am presenting the situation of the access and the learning in the post-COVID. Starting with the introduction of my piece, the COVID-19 has suppressed the major segments of the society and the economic growth around the world, and the Pakistan standouts not in exception. The education sector is badly affected here. What's happening here is that the repeated school closure has demotivated the school-going children. They are learning from the home, through the home and the digital resources. And moreover, the children are disconnected from the institutions. It has introduced the communication gap between the students and the institution that led to the famous term of the day, that is, which is the learning losses. Now, a snapshot of some of the situation is captured through a small-scale COVID-19 survey that was held in March 2021. Now, my present piece aims to present the situation of access and learning in the post-COVID versus the pre-COVID. We are considering the ASA 2019 as a pre-COVID period and the COVID-19 ASA 2021 as a post-COVID.
Hello, Cass. Just allow me to interrupt you. Do you have your slides, or Usman, could you kindly just share? Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Is everybody looking at my slides? I was hoping to.
All right. We can see your slides now.
Okay. Now, I will start with my first slide of my finding of the study. The children left behind are increased during the post-COVID. We see that the female children has been increased in the post-COVID period. That were 24% in the pre-COVID. The 3% increase is coming from the female children. By looking at the out-of-school children, by the schooling years age group, we see that the children from the secondary education years has the more out-of-school, has the proportion of the more out of school as compared to the early ages. Next, this is the picture from the currently enrolled children only. We see that the NER, net enrollment rate, for the secondary education age groups has been declined more as compared to the early ages. We see that the 4% decline has been attributed to the COVID-19. Next, this slide presents the learning losses by the different socioeconomic strata. We see that the first figure presents the wealth learning trajectory. We see that the children that has attained the story level, and the first two top bar, that has attained the story level and belonging to the richest households, has been declined in the post-COVID. They are declined from 9.5% in the pre-COVID to the 7.8% in the post-COVID. By looking at the gender, we see that the male children that were 47% at the story level pre-COVID, they are declined to the 39% in post-COVID. Next, this is the slide that presents the remedial measures to the learning losses. We see that the which learning support the children are using to cope their learning losses. We see that the children that has received the support from the schools, 72% of them are able to correctly read the sentence in Urdu, whereas the children that are using the media, digital resources or the tuition resources, only 62% of them could reach the sentence level, and so on. We see that this percentage of the highly proficient children can be found in the relatives category. Now at the end, the major conclusion from our finding is that the out of school and the learning losses surrounded by the socioeconomic subgroups of the population, they are majorly they are identified here in this study. The recommendations, there are the 5 recommendations. In the first, we see that the children left behind are highlighted with a vulnerable condition during the COVID. There is a need to focus more on these children, especially the poorest households and the households with the more female children of the school going age. Second recommendation is that a community-based hectic approaches are needed to include the identified vulnerable population. The third, that there is need to provide more learning support by the school authorities to the children during the COVID restrictions. In this regard, the different and the appropriate teaching strategies with respect to the education levels would help the children left behind to meet the learning targets. The fourth recommendation is there is to explore some need-based adaptive teaching practices that can be adapted at the schools to cope the learning losses, especially among the most vulnerable children. The fifth and the last recommendation is that there is a need to conduct a large-scale national study that would focus on the drivers of losses attributed by the COVID-19. It will help to identify the area of interventions to meet the access and the learning targets. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Wakas. I think that what you've done is really to shed light, on even greater light on the vulnerability of children left behind, and also the importance of community learning. Critical. The need for adaptive practice evidence. Going back to evidence, why evidence is important. Thank you for your excellent presentation. We have only 15 minutes now to go into the and I see that they have been question and answer box, the chat box. So I'm going to delve straight into the questions that were direct at.
Sorry, is it just me or is the audio unclear?
I think we are struggling.
Yeah, I think we are all struggling. Sorry, Dr. Moon, we can't hear you very well.
Sorry, is it my audio?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to go straight into the first set of questions for Vikram. And I'm very excited that some of these questions have actually been answered, in the chat box. So for example, there was a first question on the framework that defines what is expected for each child, depending on the kind of disability that they have, and also questions around alignment with national curriculum. And I think that the answer that came forth from Dipali, I think, was yes, there is a framework, there's an instructional manual and adaptation guidelines that lay out the expectation and assessment accommodations to be provided while assessing for children with disabilities, specifically for children with visual, hearing, speech, and cognitive disabilities. And I see that you've also included your URL there because there was a question around being able to access some of these resources and some of the nascent evidence. And so you have a URL of the toolkit, instructional manual, guidelines, and instructional videos available at assessmentforall.org, assessmentforall.org. So I'm going to go straight into one of the other questions, which I'd really like for you, Vikram, to please shed some light on. So the assessments, there's a question around whether you have, what the results were, whether you can shed a little bit of light on the results, although it's available online, but just a little bit of light on the results, and also whether inclusive education is possible. I know that you're going to share the results in the future, but if you can tell us in just 2 minutes so that people have a taster before they go online or access to it. Just in 2 minutes.
Yes, thanks for the question, Mo. Yes, so a couple of key takeaways. One is that the tool will be an open source tool, so anyone can adapt it to their national curriculum. The second thing is that most of the learning outcomes that we have included in the tool are from the Global Proficiency Framework, so it will be valid for the Global South. The third thing is on the data. So we'll be publishing the report by this year, definitely. I mean, the target for us is next month, but yes, as soon as possible. But just as a snippet, one of the interesting things that we found was children without disabilities, the mean scores were relatively less than children with visual impairment. So what key takeaway for inclusive education is that if we have this good support system for any kind of disabilities, that should match to any child who is going to school without disabilities. So a short answer to the question that can it make inclusive education a reality? So yes, on a promising note, we do feel that. The only thing is that maybe there will be a broader consensus needed in terms of investing in it. And investment, I mean, there is a sort of a misconception that huge human resource or money is needed, financing is needed, but actually that's not true. Slight increment in the finances and the human capabilities should help us reach that inclusive goal of inclusive education. So yes, that's it. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. I think that we're all really looking forward, to the release of the data, and we just want to again thank you very much for sharing this study with us, and also explaining, how it was, how the approach that you took, and also giving us a bit of a taster about what we can expect. Thank you very much for that. Second set of questions for Harold, paper 2. The first question here, and I think I'll just focus on one question, for now in order to manage the time. And it's a 3-in-1 question. So Harold, you might want to get ready for this one. So the question is, how do study circles happen? Are they peer, parent, or teacher-led? There's also a need to clarify whether this teacher, in the program was a program resource, or whether the teacher was employed by the government. And if the teacher was employed by the government, how did you make them embrace this new role? So the first question there is, how do study circles happen? Was the teacher a program resource, or was the teacher employed by the government? And what was the role of the parents in supporting continued learning? Harold?
All right, thank you. So in terms of how study circles happen, they are face-to-face as first point. They are community-led, which means that they happen within the community where learners live. The facilitator, the person who teaches, should come from that community. In that way, we minimize travel, we minimize contact with external persons, and the teaching is within the community. It also happens at their chosen place. Within the community, they also choose a meeting point where they can meet. All COVID-19 preventive measures have to be observed in terms of the country guidance. In our case, it was sitting, social distancing, physical distancing, hand washing, and masking. So those have to be done, and it is mainly through a facilitator support. And so it also goes along with home learning materials, because we minimized study circles time compared to the normal teaching hours. And so much of the work was also have to be done at home by the learners themselves. We had also reduced numbers. Our normal classes were a class of 60 learners. We reduced it to 15. So each of our teachers had 15 as the study circle group. So they are facilitator led, and they are done in that way at a community level. In terms of the teacher, we have two types or levels of teachers. For the CBE program, Complementary Basic Education program, our teacher is not a government teacher. It is a program resource, but there's a national framework of CBE, and the facilitator is within that framework, being a program resource. And even within government CBE program, they also follow that framework. But within the second component of our learning outcomes to learners is girls' clubs. So there we have got a government employee, and the need there was because the government teacher has got more base curriculum and could support our learners well, but also integrating the learning from the government skills program and outreach, but also to build sustainable support around girls' support as a way of preparing when our learners move from the CBE program into the regular primary schools, that there's that continuity building up. Motivation is key there, but I think critically is to build on their knowledge, but also the support they can render based on their roles in government on skills training for learners. Thanks, Chair.
I think that's very, very enlightening. Thank you very much for that, Harold. There is another question on the pros and the cons of the HRBA child rights-based approach, the empowerment. I've sent that to you in the chat box, and if you could please type up the response so that everyone who's interested in that would be wonderful. I'm going to go to you now, Edith. There's a question for you, which is, how did training or support of monitors differ from the virtual training sessions for the teachers that the government had already taken up during the COVID period? Why was there a different format required? So how do the training and support of monitors differ from the virtual teacher training sessions that the government have already taken up during the COVID
para
period?
nosotros, ¿verdad? Bueno, les comparto cuál es la diferencia. La diferencia principal radica en la didáctica con la que se trabajó esta
The main difference is the way in which this capacity was done. The teachers were taught in a traditional way, but through the virtual means. They were trained through conferences with few resources, virtual resources, with few technological resources. And from there, we have to see that the learning environments must be very different. The teaching must be adapted to this new environment. This was also done with monitors, which for us was a challenge. Would we, for this, not to lose light? trying to
Ok. Sí, entonces lo que nos ha obligado entonces a repensar esta didáctica.
rethink about this way of teaching and training online. On the other hand, I'd like to answer the question of Virginia, whether the evaluation was done in paper. The evaluations were done face-to-face. We visited the homes of the children, as we do them in Citizen. Then the monitors were assigned a certain number of children to whose homes they went, and they applied to them the tool. But for some of them, the access was difficult, and therefore we did through Zoom or through WhatsApp, with which we did the evaluation. But they didn't use pen and paper.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Egypt. And there is another question for you, which I've typed up to you in the chat box. And if you're able to type up the response to that so everyone can read it, that would be wonderful.
Sí.
One more very quick question, Edith. How did you assess? Was it a pen and paper assessment?
Sí, es lo que acabo de...
This is what I've just said. The evaluation was done face-to-face. We visited the homes of the children, and we applied the training tool there in their houses, and then they were inscribed for innovation. It was not by pen and paper.
Oh, very good. Thank you for that clarity. Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Edith, and very well done. Moving over to you, Wakas, one quick question for you from the chat box. Just so that they understand the data correctly. Has there been a 2% point improvement of children who can read?
2% de melhoria nos campos de leção.
Sorry,
Yes.
we are either getting the French or Spanish translation on the English channel. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm also going to repeat the question for Wakas. Just so this questioner understands the data correctly, has there been a 2% point improvement, a 2 percentage point improvement of children who can read from the poorest households?
Hello. Yes, exactly. The finding showed, as you have asked the questions for, that is a 2% increment. But as long as we see that the wealth status improves with the improving learning, the situation become different, especially at the higher ends. And moreover, when you will look at the other segments, like the poor at the lattice level, and the average households at the world level, and the rich at the sentence level, the three sides of the bars are totally different there. But the disparities are highlighted at the extreme end. That is also a finding from the small scale study.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Wakas. We've come to the end of the session, and I think that the question posed by Ranajit is actually a good point to end because it gives us an opportunity to reflect. And so it's a reflection point actually for us all as we exit this session. And he says the presentation shared very innovative solutions to support equitable and inclusive education. And when we are implementing them, how can we develop a practice to test the innovation's scale friendliness? In short, how can we test the scalability of these interventions to ensure that we are positioning them to reach more children and address learning challenges and learning gaps at scale? And I think that's a great point, for us to reflect on. And on that note, I would like to say thank you to all of the excellent presenters and the wonderful papers that have been presented today. I personally have taken away a lot. And I'd like to say thank you for the opportunity to moderate this session. I'll now hand over to Virginia to continue with the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much, Mo. In the spirit of learning, I think it's really interesting listening to the various perspectives in the rooms, ranging from trying to look into assessments for learners with disabilities and how that can also be part of the mainstream data that helps us rethink education and learning as we build back better. And also a deep dive into, what did COVID mean for most of the children. And we have therefore seen that irrespective of the wealth within the families, there was still a certain amount of loss in terms of learning. So again, also the other presenters looking into facilitating learning continuity at home, hybrid approaches by NEA Mexico, and getting to have communities actively engaged in supporting the same. So really exciting stuff and evidence-backed, so we can actually look into this and ask ourselves, where is the future of these populations that we're working with, especially the underserved or the marginalized children, and how can we even really look into issues of pedagogy, as was raised by the second presentation, that indeed the issue of disabilities needs to be looked into. So allow me at this juncture to allow us 2 minutes to stretch, but as we stretch, I will invite Usman to guide us into the next session on how we are going to access our breakout rooms. Within the breakout rooms, we are going to meet different teams. So we will have 2 moderators at this point, or 2 session chairs at this point, taking over immediately after the short break. And this is Raj, who will be stepping in on behalf of Shepi. And also have Said, who will be in charge of the second breakout rooms. So if I could allow you, Usman, to guide us into how to access the breakout rooms, and then we can reconvene at exactly 17:45 to be able to begin the next session.
Thank you so much, Virginia. If you could kindly stop sharing your screen. Okay, so we will actually be finishing this session here, and we have set up 2 different links for breakout 1 and breakout 2. The details are on the screen in your chat box and momentarily in your inbox as well. So everybody will be receiving the links to join breakout 1 or breakout 2, depending on what you prefer. And we will see you there, like Virginia said. So yeah, I've sent everything on the email. It's on the screen as well as in the chat. Wherever you prefer, you can copy this information, and we will see you in the breakout room shortly. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Usman. Thank you so much. So members, please check into the chat and choose either breakout room 1 or breakout room 2. Just to remind ourselves, in breakout room 1, we shall be looking at, is there any value add in introducing English as a medium of instruction in upper primary schools? And the second paper is Mothers, Mobiles and Learning During the Pandemic, Insights from Assessing Children aged 3 to 6 in South Asia. So if you're interested in exploring those 2 issues or listening to the insights from these 2 papers, please join breakout room 1. In breakout room 2, we're looking into Colibri implementation for teacher training using TAO, lessons learned from Colombia. We'll also be having a paper, Progressing with Kadam in India, an accelerated learning program for primary school children. And the third paper in this stream is the Implementing Preschool Curriculum through Indigenous Pedagogies. So kindly select your preferred breakout room. We'll be starting at exactly 17:45 East African time. So let's meet there.
One last announcement, but this is for our interpreters. So Branley, Alan, and Paulino will be joining us in breakout room 1. Ben, Professor Jack, and Jose will be joining us in breakout session 2. You also have the links to both breakout rooms in your emails. So please use links, and we'll see you in the breakout sessions. So we will leave this on up until everybody leaves. Please leave at your pleasure. Thank you so much.
Can be managed, it'll be great. And also, I hope it is all right that we are recording this session. Of course, we will not use this recording in any form or manner that gives out your identities or anything like that. It will be used primarily for purposes of learning and capacity development. I hope that's all right. If you have any objections, please do share so we will take appropriate actions based on your objections, if any. All right, so this session has two very interesting papers in store from us, right? Originally, Moitsipe, who is the co-founder of Young Love, was supposed to chair this, but she's tied up with a lot of work, and she requested that I take over. So I am Rajesh Singh. I look after programs as the director of programs at PAL Network. Prior to joining PAL, I was also a part of the PAL Prasad family, so I'm used to and familiar with the network even before joining PAL. And it's wonderful to get this opportunity to hear you all. First presentation is by Jennifer, who is from the University of Oxford. The paper is titled, "Is there any value added in introducing English as a medium of instruction in upper primary schools?" As you probably know, that mother tongue literacy and mother tongue literacy-based education is very important for children's development as well as learning outcome improvements. And this paper explores this aspect of whether English as a medium of instruction, mind you, not as a subject, but as a medium of instruction, helps learning. So over to you, Jennifer. Please introduce yourself in about 20 seconds, and we have about 10 minutes.
So much, Raj. I'm hoping we can all see my screen. My name is Jennifer Oparakuni, as introduced, and actually prior to my DPhil, I was the program and research manager spearheading the Teaching at the Right Level program. So it's really exciting to hear all the TAL-related projects and innovations that are happening on that front as well. But today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about my research. Is there any value added in introducing English as a medium of instruction in primary schools? Here's a brief outline of what I'll be talking about. Just to jump right in multilingual countries where English is not the first spoken language or the L1, English language of instruction is highly contested policy challenge with potentially large effects on students' learning. UNESCO currently formally recommends at least 6 years of mother tongue education for ethnically diverse communities. However, we find countries with varying education language policies. In the African context, we see so-called francophone or lusophone countries using anything between 1 to 3 years of mother tongue education, and anglophone countries using something between 4 to 6 years of mother tongue education. And one of the reasons that the research shows for this early transition from mother tongue education into foreign language of instruction is actually an artifact of the colonial era, where the national language adopted from the formal colonial language was mirrored into the education language policy. So in Anglophone countries where English is the national language, this was automatically mirrored into the education language policy without maybe referencing the research around what would be beneficial for knowledge acquisition in language. So even in countries with little to no colonial history, Ethiopia, for example, which is my study site here, similar policies are adopted as well. Another common reason that we find for the push for English medium instruction in early primary grades actually also stems from parents and teachers who believe that academic attainment is directly related to the time of exposure to English medium instruction. So English medium instruction then has become this global phenomenon And this paper that I've put together here is asking the question, is there any value added in introducing this in the primary school level? So what does the literature say about this subject? The main message, as Dr. Raj already preempted us here, is that, mother tongue education in early grade years improves students' reading abilities, numeracy, participation in class, attendance, overall student performance. But what is less known in the literature is that there are some studies that actually find little to no effects and sometimes even negative effects. So they're diminishing effects of mother tongue education. The significance of the paper that I'm going to be sharing in the larger literature is that it adds some experimental quantitative evidence to the already very rich descriptive evidence base on language of instruction, particularly in the African context. And the study is able to compare 7 to 8 years of mother tongue education to English medium instruction. This is quite rare, as most empirical studies that we have usually look at 1 to 4 years of mother tongue education. The paper also provides a rich source of individual level panel data. So the model that I use includes background statistics on students' individual background, their families, teachers' qualifications, as well as school quality variables on the comprehensive outcome measures that I'm interested in here, which is maths and English for the learners. Now, just a brief note on the methodology that I used. My study site, as mentioned, is Ethiopia. And the stars denote the regions that the students are from, the regions, the schools that are included in the sample. But the reason for this research and the reason to be able to actually look at this empirically is a 1994 education reform in Ethiopia that gave regions the autonomy to decide language of instruction policy in primary schools. Now, primary school in Ethiopia is from year 1 to year 8. And because of this reform, it created a natural kind of experiment with close homogeneous variation between states. So we have regions where there's only mother tongue education, and there's regions where there's a transition from mother tongue into English language instruction at varying grades. And it is through this variation that I am estimating the causal effect. So I use a value-added model of achievement, which is quite common in the education production literature. And the intuition behind this value-added model, which is why I had this pun on my title, this is a value-added estimation model, is it includes students' past achievements into the model to capture, any past unobservable endowments or shocks in its estimating knowledge production. So I have my specification here, and I won't really go through the details, but what I want you to see here is that the lag achievement score is estimated by this Y.
Just a bit slower, please, if you don't mind.
The parameter of interest here, what I'm looking at is
El parámetro de interés aquí. Tengo diferentes parámetros.
Ellen, you're in English panel. Ellen?
Yes, I'm trying to tell the speaker to just slow it down a bit so that the interpretation can be better. If you slow it down just a little bit, it'll be easier to interpret.
Me to pause?
No, you don't have to pause. Just slow it down so that we can be able to interpret. No mind.
So just
or maybe
slow your pace while you're presenting. So you're going too fast for interpreters to keep up.
Yeah, we just want the people to be able to understand what you're saying.
No, I'm trying to keep to my 10 minutes. But basically, what I wanted you to note in the specification is the lagged achievement score denoted by the YIST -1, and this array of background characteristics that I described on the individual characteristics, the family level characteristics, the teacher variables, such as years of education, the number of years teaching, as well as school quality variables. School quality variables, if the school has electricity, has laboratories for female and male students, has adequate reading materials, etc. All of this is included in this model that's being used to estimate if English language of instruction, how it impacts students' math and student English. And the sample is from 38 schools, 4,420 students in grades 7 and 8 in 5 regions in Ethiopia. So to go over my findings, I find that language of instruction, as expected, is a key input in education production. The main results show that English medium of instruction compared to mother tongue instruction reduces test scores by 0.2 standard deviations. Now, this is quite large, as the median in international education literature is 0.1 standard deviations in mathematics. but has no significant effect in English test scores. So what this means is that students that are being taught math in English do worse than students that are being taught math in their mother tongue. But students that are being taught math in English don't do any better in their English outcomes compared to students that are being taught math in their mother tongue. So you're finding a situation here where the students are being taught in English and they're not actually even performing better in English compared to their mother tongue counterparts. When I looked at treatment heterogeneity, I found no differences between boys and girls in the English medium instruction and the mother tongue education schools. No significant differences on teacher inputs such as years of experience, and there was this national program called an English Language Improvement Program for all teachers. So either in the English medium instruction schools or the mother tongue education schools, there were no significant differences between the teacher inputs either. But there was a little bit of nuance to the grade of transition. So I find actually that counter to the mainstream narrative, students that transition earlier, so students that move from mother tongue into English language of instruction, anywhere between grade 1 to 5, perform better in English compared to their mother tongue learners, but it makes no difference to their mathematics. So one of the reasons why this could be happening could be a timing effect, where it could indicate that an early transition actually helps your test scores, but in the long run makes no difference to your math scores. Whereas a late transition has a negative effect on your math scores, but has no difference to your English scores. So the way that this is rationalized is there could be a case of cognitive overload happening here with the students, where the later that they transition into English, they are now burdened with learning more difficult curriculum, more complicated concepts, along with learning in a language that they're less familiar with. So it kind of goes both ways. Very early transition, the kids will adapt, catch up. Transition, it's super overload and information for the kids, learning in a less familiar language, as well as being burdened with complicated concepts or more complicated concepts. So a few policy implications to round up. Language of instruction influences how learners perform in foundational subjects such as mathematics and English. Students are likely to struggle with other subjects too. So education language policies, regardless of national language policy, need to be re-evaluated in line with the current relevant and rigorous evidence. There is a bit of a caution here that even in environments where there is an eager and a willingness for mother tongue education, there can be instructional environment and implement such as poor teacher deployment policies, under-resourced teacher training, inadequate instructional materials, and so on. For countries that are opting for English medium instruction, an earlier transition, as mentioned, or a prolonged mother tongue education for as long as possible may actually be the education language policy worth exploring. So the middle ground is where it's really murky. The trade-off, of course, to remember is the language that's used for standardized testing, and to consider that in education language policies. So to round up, the quality of instruction as well, the literature also shows, backs this up, is actually even more important than the language of instruction. I think we see that theme also coming through a number of the presentations today. Overall, there is a lot more nuance to language of instruction than the mainstream discussions that we hear around language of instruction, and it's likely to come with political and social policy challenges. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for that, Jennifer, for fantastic presentation. And 0.2 standard deviation is a lot in terms of learning. It's surprising data. I would request and follow up on Paul's request. If you have questions for Jennifer, please share them on the chat window. Now, the advantage of this group is that we have 2 papers and 50 or 70 minutes, right? Compared to the other group, which has 3 papers and 70 minutes. So what we can do is we can take a lot more number of questions because we've kept to the 10-minute limit. So if you have questions, please share them. and once the presentations are done, we'll go to each panelist and presenter and get our responses. Is that all right, everybody? All right. So thank you, Jennifer, and let's move to the next presenter. Next presenter is Varsha Prasad from the NME unit at Prasad Education Foundation. Her paper is titled Mothers, Mobiles and Learning During the Pandemic, Insights from Assessing Children aged 3 to 6 at South Asia. Now, one interesting, I would say statistical data is that in the past decade, the characteristics of mothers has significantly changed in India. So I'm not sure about Africa, I'm sure it has, but in India it definitely has. More and more number of mothers or percentage of mothers in rural parts of India can actually read, right? Now, which gives us an immense opportunity to leverage simple text messages to get them to support children's education. And that is the topic of Varsha's presentation. So over to you, Varsha. Please spend 20 seconds introducing yourself, and then let's go through your presentation.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Please let me know if my screen is visible and you can see it on slideshow.
You can see it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. So, hello everyone. My name is Varsha, and I'm a part of the Measurement, Monitoring, and Evaluation team at Pratham Education Foundation in India. And at Pratham, I mostly support the measurement efforts for early childhood education programs. So today, on behalf of both these teams, the NME team as well as the ECE team, I just like to share with you some of our experiences and insights in how during the COVID-19 pandemic, we worked with mothers of young children to empower them to further their children's learning outcomes. So just to give you a bit of background on early childhood education at Pratham. Pratham's EC intervention focuses on the holistic development of children aged 3 to 6 years. And prior to the pandemic, the implementation of this program was mostly through a two-pronged approach. The first aspect was to actually directly have an intervention with children within their preschool centers. So these are also referred to as Anganwadis, which are government EC centers in India. So one was to work directly with children and do activities with them. And the other approach was to also engage with mothers. And this was done in the community through small mothers groups that were formed at the hamlet level. And there are also village level events that used to happen where Pratham team members, volunteers, and Anganwadi staff used to engage with both mothers and children. But however, post-March 2020, of course, across the country, Anganwadis were forced to shut. So Pratham also had to transition out of this Anganwadi-centric model and transition into a home and community-centric remote learning model. And like mentioned by Mr. Raj, mothers were put at the center of this effort with young children. Mostly because, of course, through experiences as well as research that has been done, mothers do play a very important role in furthering their children's development at this very young age. So the idea was to kind of implement this model by sending mothers simple activities through their phones, and they were like they were encouraged to do these activities with their children. And so these activities, again, were appropriate and simple and made use of any sort of easily available housing materials that mothers had. So they kind of had songs, stories, rhymes, puzzles, pre-literacy and numeracy activities, and a lot more. The type of messages that were sent did differ based on the type of phone that was available in the household. So if there was no access to a smartphone and just a simple keypad phone with no internet connection, the activity was sent through a simple text message under 150 characters which described the activity. However, if there was access to a smartphone, there were, of course, WhatsApp messages with much more engaging YouTube videos that had gone out, or sometimes audio clips were also sent. So the type of message also differed. But in addition, what's important to note is that in addition to just sending this message, a very important part of the program model was to have continuous feedback and follow-up communication with mothers. So this was something that Pratham team members as well as community volunteers who were mobilized during this time, they took up the responsibility of talking to mothers frequently, taking feedback from them, and really ensuring that they were able to support their children in these activities. And through this model, over a span of 1 year between March 2020 to March 2021, we reached about 90,000 children between ages 3 to 6 across 14 states of India. So this is just to give you a bit of background on what we were working on during the first year of the pandemic. But in order to understand now the learning situation of our young children, in January of this year, lockdowns were being lifted across most places in India because the pandemic was, the cases were tapering. So at this time, Pratham team members did conduct in-person assessment tasks with these young children. And the idea of conducting this was to understand really the learning progress of children over the last 1.5 years. And the reason we could compare it is because we did conduct assessments in September 2019 before the pandemic. And we had that as a comparison to, the January level, which was conducted after the pandemic or during the pandemic. So that was, of course, one aspect of it, but also the other aspect of it was to see whether there was any relationship between the background or characteristics of the mother with the child's learning progress. So these assessments were done with over 4,500 children across 6 states in India. And so the assessment was actually had, activity-based tasks that were child-friendly and what the Pratham team members actually administered directly with children. And these tasks included cognitive development tasks like classifying cards based on categories, matching cards, sequencing cards. They also had pre-math activities like number recognition, as well as some language development activities like describing pictures, handling books, as well as alphabet recognition. When we saw our results, we will, for this analysis, be focusing on some of the insights that we see in number recognition and alphabet recognition, since we see some significant correlations here. And we'll be focusing on kind of how the mother's own characteristics and engagement kind of relate with the child's learning outcomes. So the first thing we wanted to see was that, is there any link between the engagement with the content that was being sent with the child's performance over this last 1.5 period, right? So again, engagement is hard to quantify, but we try to quantify it through a proxy indicator, where we kind of figured out based on the number of messages that were sent over the last 1 week, how many were actually completed. Now this completion rate over the last 1 week was seen as a proxy for the mother's engagement with the content. And then now based on this completion rate, we could bucket children into categories. So, of course, those who are completed less than 50%, those who completed between 50 to 74%, and those who completed more than 75%. So across these buckets, we kind of plotted out what percentage of children could recognize alphabets a 1.5 years ago versus now. So, these graphs are telling the picture, but the main takeaway was that we saw that when more than 50% of the activities were completed, children were more likely to demonstrate learning improvements. So this served as some kind of validation or evidence for us to say that there is some linkage between engagement and performance. But the real thing is, what went behind this engagement was really the existence of the two-way communication channel that existed between mothers and Pratham team members or community volunteers, right? And because there was this continuous feedback, continuous communication happening, that we were actually able to sustain engagement with this type of content over a prolonged period. So this was the first interesting finding that we saw. So the next thing we wanted to see was there any kind of relationship between the type of phone that the mother herself owned and the performance of the child, right? So again, a mother's phone ownership matters, of course, because it does reflect some underlying socio-economic conditions of the household. But in addition, of course, if she has a phone, she has longer access. If, for example, if she has a smartphone, she has longer access to more engaging digital content compared to if she doesn't. And we've also seen that mothers who own smartphones are also more likely to have a stronger social standing in their family. So given all these differences, we wanted to see how children's learning also differed. So similarly, we plotted the results out, and one thing that of course stood out was that when the mothers themselves did not own phones, both at the baseline level as well as a year and a half later, learning outcomes were relatively worse off than when a phone was available. And of course, this kind of pointed to the digital divide issue that we know has been a problem and exacerbated during the pandemic. But the other thing that we saw is that as long as there was access to a phone in general, that could have a positive relationship with children's learning outcomes. So I don't think it is far too surprising to see that when the smartphone was available, that the learning outcomes were much better. It is quite intuitive to know that. But I think what was interesting and surprising for us to see as well is that even when there was a simple, phone with no internet connection and you were just receiving text messages, that was still somewhat good enough to kind of generate a certain degree of progress. So this showed us that access to some sort of device or resource, be it low-tech or high-tech, can have a positive relationship with children's learning outcomes during this period. So these were two important findings, right? That we saw that engagement with the content mattered. We saw that access to some device mattered. So using these two findings, how did we kind of adapt mother engagement efforts after, once things started reopening and also till this very date, right? So as I had mentioned earlier, in our EC to the pandemic, we had these mothers groups that used to exist in the community. So these were groups of about 4 to 6 mothers who used to live near each other, and they were gathered on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. And the idea was for them to sit together, have some activities demonstrated to them, practice these activities, and discuss and share their experiences regarding their children's learning. So now these groups were reactivated, and these groups also were, had these leaders emerge who we internally refer to as smart mothers, mostly because they're really good at, they usually become leaders because they're good at communication and they're willing to take up that leadership role, but often they also have access to smartphones. So because of the presence of this group as well as the mother who had this access, it served as a way of sustaining the engagement and also ensuring access towards, access for digital content for those mothers who didn't have phones, and they were the most likely to be left behind. So these mothers groups really served as a mechanism to try to address any gaps that we can see within mothers, right? Whether it be in terms of their own engagement or whether it be in terms of their access to technology. And through these groups, between October 2020 to March 2021, we could reach over 70,000 mothers. And in fact, now there has been a new campaign in which we've actually tried to cover more than double this amount of mothers through mothers groups activities. So some of our just like simple takeaways from our experiences during this period is that the pandemic has highlighted the role of the family and how they are in furthering the learning outcomes of children. And here we kind of focused on the role of mothers. So what we saw is that even during these difficult conditions, remain with mothers continuously through simple and appropriate digital content, and having even access to low-tech resources can have a positive relationship with children's learning outcomes. And in order to sustain engagement and ensure that that access is also reaching mothers who are likely to be left behind, we use this mothers groups mechanism to kind of reach out to mothers who were likely to be disadvantaged and help in sustaining the motivation. So thanks a lot. Happy to take any questions in the next session.
Thank you, Varsha, for that fantastic presentation. We have quite a few questions for both your presentation, also for Jennifer's presentation. Also, a quick reminder that if you have a question and you want to ask directly, please go ahead, unmute yourself, ask directly, and I'm sure our presenter will be happy to answer. Right? In terms of time, Paul, please remind us, do we have about 30 minutes left?
Yes, Raj.
Yeah.
We do have about 30, yeah.
So we have 30 minutes for Q&A. Let's start off with any questions that are there for Jennifer.
Hello. Hi,
Hello,
Raj.
Mama Zaida.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and thank you, presenter. Thank you very much for a great presentation, and congratulations for the great work that you are doing over there. I have two questions. One is in relation to the mothers who might be illiterate. Have you come across the mothers who cannot read and they will be blocked to read the SMS in the phone and not access the content? And unfortunately, the fathers are not engaged, because if the mothers are illiterate, maybe the father any plans to make sure that men are also involved in supporting children. Otherwise, women are always overburdened because maybe they are easily available at home. But what we see is that men are, keeping a distance in engaging children and supporting them to learn. And this brings us back again to the gender inequality in engagement in child rearing and socialization at home. Thank you very much.
Okay. So thank you so much for your. So to answer your first, the literacy, our education backgrounds of mothers, and what was our experience. So absolutely, there were definitely mothers who were illiterate. And not even an insignificant amount. Like I think out of our sample, we had about 20% mothers who were illiterate. Of course, that's only in our sample, but this can be a much bigger number anywhere else. I think that was a very important point that was taken into consideration even when designing this program and campaign, because it wasn't only about sending the messages, but it was also about supporting them and actually understanding the messages, right? So there's two components to it. One is that there were always the aspect of feedback calls and follow-up calls was important in trying to engage with mothers who are not literate. So having the Pratham staff or a community member kind of speak to them, or sometimes in the nearby areas itself. So we even used to take, the phones and maybe show the video or like tell them about the activity. So it was about getting that support system outside the house. That was one aspect. The other aspect, of course, is, what you said about fathers. Now, they were not like the center of the program in the way that it was designed, and we haven't collected systematic evidence about them, but anecdotally, especially during the beginning of the pandemic when everyone was stuck inside, there was anecdotes about fathers also kind of being involved, especially in terms of reading messages. However, of course, this declined once, people started going back to work and they didn't have enough time. But like in terms of supporting the mothers who were illiterate, it was mostly to get that support from the community. And the other thing that what was really important was that these activities and content had to be very simple. They had to make use of materials that were available in the household, and they had to be something that could, that was not related to the mother being educated. Which is why even when we got our results and we saw whether education was a significant factor in the learning progress of children, we saw that education was not a significant factor. We think that it is probably linked to the simplicity of the content. So I hope I've been able to answer the first part of your question. I think the second part about engagement of fathers, I think we all acknowledge that it's really, really important, but it's all the more difficult now with them going back to work. And I think this is something for us as an organization also to think about further and develop more strategies. That being said, fathers are definitely not discouraged from kind of joining in the activities that happen, in the community level or at the level. But there's
Yeah.
nothing specifically being done, as you said. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mama Zaida, I have a follow-up question for you actually. Now, this last statement that fathers are going back to work, now this is and more involved, because typically all the EC programs with family engagement focus on mothers or older children, the girl child, the older sister. How do we bring in brothers and fathers?
Yeah, thank you, Raj, for throwing back the challenge. I think that is what everybody is struggling, and what you have explained is similar even in the African context. But what we see is that now there's a loophole, I would say, for men to relax and not engage so much with the children. For example, we have many women who are working the same like their husbands. So they all leave home and go to work. So who will be remain and support the child? And sometimes at home there are boys and girls, or maybe it's only the boys who remain at home when mom has gone to do some work outside to get some money. And these boys will not bother to support the child because they are men. They are grouped in a group of men, and they are waiting for the mother to come back and start attending the house chores, cooking, doing everything. And later in the evening is when the mother can sit down and support the child. But when mom is doing the cooking in the kitchen, dad is reading newspaper in the sitting room. They are already back from work. So these are the challenging situations that we need to start talking about and see what we can do to also involve men, because I see that they also can make time and space to assist, especially considering that women are also engaged like men. And if they are not employed, for example, in town, in the rural areas, since morning they are working in the farm in Africa, for example, busy in the farm until 6 o'clock in the evening, they go back home. And the child is waiting for mother to come and assist with homework or to assist with SMS and whatever. And sometimes it is the daddy who has the phone and not the mother. So they'll have to wait for daddy to come with his phone, and then they access the learning text, and mommy will be the one now attending the child. So I think we need to discuss and find ways of also encouraging men and involving men in this learning journey of the child. I'm not saying it is easy, it is hard because of our culture, because of our traditions and the position we have put men to and women separately, but we need to do something about this. So Raj, it is similar, there's no difference, but we need to reach a point where we can challenge this situation and support each other. Otherwise, the mothers will be overburdened. Thank you.
Thank you, Mama Zaida. There's a next question for Jennifer from Gabby. Gabby, do you want to go ahead and share your question?
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Jennifer, for your presentation. I think I'm curious to know if you had to give a recommendation to current PAL actors who are working specifically in literacy and numeracy acquisition and supporting that from an implementer's perspective, what would you recommend based on your findings, since there is a sort of complicated relationship between language of instruction, timing, mother tongue English, standardized tests, sort of what can implementers walk away with as a guiding point?
It's a really good question. Thanks, Gabby. So what is interesting here is that the research is pulling us in two different directions. Mainstream, what we see, what we get the recommendations from UNESCO saying 6 years if there are diverse communities, diverse ethnicities. But we also see that there is hope where when you start off with English acquisition, where of course I must mention that in this case, English as a subject is being taught. It's not that the kids are being taught in English without all the kids receiving English. So whether they're in a mother tongue school or they're in an English instruction school, they're all learning the language of English. So the kids that start off being instructed in English, actually in the long run, are pretty much the same. The ones that start off in grade 1 do better in English and don't do any worse in math. But the ones that are transitioning later are the ones that are really struggling. So I guess the question here really is looking at your individual context, looking at what policymakers are prioritizing. If your standardized tests are in English or in French or in Portuguese, whatever it is that your national language is, then that's basically the goal, that's the goalpost. So how do we get our learners there to be able to achieve in those languages, achieve in those national languages which have become education languages? So it's a twofold question, which is why I don't want to give, like, it's not a blanket answer. It's either very early transition or no transition at all, which of course has a lot of policy implications because there are economic implications to that if you keep kids in mother tongue for a prolonged period of time. So yeah, I don't know if that satisfies, but it's not a clear-cut answer. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Gabby, and for that response, Jennifer. And just a follow-up question to this is, in your experiment in Ethiopia, did you face a multilingual classroom? Because we do understand, theoretically, at least I understand, that mother tongue literacy is good. But in practice, when I actually go to schools in Rajasthan, especially Rajasthan, where the census says, hey, they're speaking only Hindi, but that's not true. They're speaking variations of Hindi that are linguistically far apart from each other. It is very hard to actually instruct children in their mother tongue unless teachers are specially trained to do so. In Ethiopia, did you face the same problem, or was it everybody speaking the same mother tongue?
Yeah, so I think this is a common problem in lots of African countries that are multilingual. In Ethiopia, it was such a wonderful study site because a lot of the regions are extremely homogeneous. So with the exception of Addis, where I actually didn't include Addis in the sample because Addis is so multicultural, everyone is moving to the capital, everyone from the different regions. But looking at the individual regions, they're fairly homogeneous. So teachers are actually trained at the teaching college in the language that they're going to teach in the school, as well as English. So the teachers are equipped to teach in their mother tongue as well as English. But the government actually also felt that teachers needed a bit of support in teaching in English, hence the National English Language Improvement Program. And I saw your comments about how you're surprised that there were no differences. And that is surprising, actually. First of all, it just means also that the program itself wasn't that effective, probably, but that the program was not a driving effect that changed any outcomes for the students. That was key. It didn't change any outcomes, whether they were being taught in mother tongue or they were being taught in English.
Thank you for that, Jennifer. All right, so there's a comment from Smitten. Smitten is also part of Prasad. He heads the ECE division at Prasad. At least he used to when I was there. So Smitten, do you want to go ahead and share your thoughts?
Because I hope that Varsha has covered all the points. But I think the discussion that I heard about, I heard that it is going towards the gender biasness rather than, focusing that everybody is busy. People who are working at home, especially women, are also equally, I feel sometimes I have observed that they are more engaged, they're more busy than the people who go out for work outside. I think considering all this difference in the context, the first thing that we need to believe that, yes, they can play an important role in their children's learning and overall development. And for that, I think easy to do things and simple things need to be demonstrated to them. And and on the other hand, I feel that one cannot always provide from outside. People need to build their self-help capacities in the hamlet level, community level, so that they can help each other. I think this has to be nurtured even for their children's learning and development, and for raising their children at level. So I think it's not a matter of how systems and schools are performing at the same time. I think it's very important that they realize that it is very easy and I can do the particular thing. For example, the thing that we are trying to do at our own, that mothers who are doing, let's say, household stuff, how she can play an important role while doing her daily chores. I think these kind of things need to be considered while working with the parents. At least in our context, it has been proved that once the confidence is built, I think then they demand for more. I have met group of mothers who asked me after a, let's say, 6-month period of providing slow information and simple to do activities. After 6 months, they demanded a child psychology session for themselves. I think that was an amazing thing, and it is also a matter of status in the community that these women, especially mothers, acquire after working with the children for their learning development. So I think it's a matter of how we proceed and how we consider and do these things at village level and hamlet level. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Smita. It parallels, and it also it takes discussion towards family participation in children's education. Isn't there like a African proverb that says it takes a village to educate a child? So I think we're going towards that proverb. All right, so we have 10 minutes left. If I may actually take the question and answer session to our friend from the Americas or from Mozambique. If you have questions, please go ahead, ask. Carlos, Amelia, if you have questions, please go ahead.
Bueno, una diferencia que...
The difference that we have noted in talking about mothers and families is that many mothers in Mexico find themselves forced to go and work because of the economic situation. And so what many of us are saying here today, we really need to redefine our terms. We have to talk about our caregivers. So because we are recycling a lot of our responsibilities. Now we have the participation of grandparents who are in economic activities. And so you find sometimes, you find these grandfathers who are taking care of children. And it's a situation that has changed. And so when you're talking about a family situation, you find that there are new players when it comes to the learning situation at home. And in our case, we have to also talk about the role that older brothers and sisters have played in families, education children. And so you find that you have to really expand the terms and include all these people when you're talking about activities that we're putting together. And because things have really changed a lot. And we have to now start including our grandparents, older brothers, older sisters in the life of children. And it is a change that we have to know. It's an important change. And when you talk about making a comment on men, some of the men really come late home, and they are involved in their children's learning over the weekend. And so it is the mothers and parents and the older brothers and sisters who find themselves more involved in the learning of the children and during the week. So we have to look at the changes, changing our realities, and we have to see how everybody else can be involved. And talking about it's curious to find out that if you do some research, you'll find that there's so many men who are involved. So we cannot really talk about the absence of men in children's learning. But what I'd like to say is that let's now include those people who are not mentioned in the presentation: grandparents, older brothers, older sisters, besides the issue of mothers involved in the children's learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos, for not only pointing out an issue in nomenclature, but also in approach, right? It actually, the change in nomenclature can actually lead to a change in approach to designing such, I would say, community or caregiver-based programs. Thank you for pointing that out. Varsha, you want to respond?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to add one small thing on the caregivers. So thank you so much for your point. I think we also did another smaller study just to focus on these mothers groups interventions and the impact of that in one of our states more recently. And I think the point about caregivers was a very important learning over there, because what we saw is that it was a region where almost 60% of mothers were also working. They were engaged in agriculture, animal husbandry, or whatever, right? So even in those cases where they weren't able to attend these weekly or bi-weekly meetings, we saw that they still, they still had a lot of improvements in their own ability and knowledge about their children's education, purely because there were caregivers who used to attend in their place when they couldn't make it to the meeting, right? So grandparents, aunts or uncles or anyone else who could come. And the point was that they would even transfer these learnings to the mothers and who would go on to transfer the learnings to their children. So I just wanted to share on that point that it's a very important learning even that we saw in one of our studies at Prasad.
Thank you for that clarification, Varsha. Just playing devil's advocate for a minute. When we say involvement of caregivers and we are looking at, say, early childhood, are we looking at only what our program is aiming at in terms of improving learning outcomes, like foundational reading, foundational math, and early reading, early math? Because, just taking from personal experience, I've had my father and my cousin brothers help me learn, but never a school subject. They help me learn football, they help me learn negotiation, they help me learn all kind of fun stuff. And the non-fun stuff was what my mother paid attention on, right? Language learning, math learning, stuff like that. So when we say involvement of caregivers, are we looking at this broad spectrum also of other things that they are better at?
Oh, sorry. I wasn't sure who it was directed towards. My apologies. I think maybe even Smithan can kind of help to answer this question. I think especially for early childhood education, the focus has always been on the holistic development, not just your pre-literacy or your pre-numeracy skill, but also your physical development, social emotional development. But that applies to everybody. That applies to something that the mother should focus on. That if not the mother, then another caregiver. But Smithan, if you would like to add something over here.
So, being father, I can definitely tell you that I'm a father of a 3-year-old child, and I'm worried about many things, not just about education. So, I think we face the same thing, Rajni, and therefore our focus is also not about only building the school readiness part, or learning readiness for that matter, but we also focus on holistic health, socio-emotional development, and overall approach. So that matters, because if a mother is thinking about child feeding and we are talking about everything, she's not going to concentrate, because her first priority is about her child's health. So I think, your point is absolutely right, because we need to talk about an holistic approach.
Okay, great, thank you. So my team is reminding me of the 5-minute mark that's remaining. Right. So I'll ask this team that's with me to figure out what to do with the next 5 minutes. Right. I'm not sure if we have a way to take a poll or something, but if we had a way to take a poll, the question I would really like everybody's response on is one. If you had to design a mother tongue based system for your own context, right? Could you share what the context is? Essentially, is it which language? One. Two, is it a multilingual environment? And three, would you focus on English language, mother tongue literacy, and if so, why? So that's the first question, which is directed towards Jennifer's presentation, right? If you could please use the chat room window to respond to that. The second question is directed towards Varsha's presentation, which is all of us understand that ECE is super important for children's school readiness and overall development. We know that the first 6 years are when maximum brain development happens. Even though that is true, our government start paying attention to children's learning only after the age of 6 in most cases, right? So if early childhood education is so important, how would you as organization leaders invest or convince communities and governments to invest more in ECE? If you could please respond to these two questions on the chat window, that would be great. And any last thoughts before we close out this session? Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you very much for hearing the presenters and presenters for the presentations. Thank you for being part of this event. Yes, and Jennifer had her hand up. So, Jennifer, you have a burning question or comment?
No, I had my clapping hands emoji to just thank you for chairing and facilitating the session.
All right. So we have about 2 minutes left. Everybody, please, I want typing sounds so that you're typing on the chat window your responses. If not, it's all right. No worries. Thank you very much. Any last words? And if not, I would also request Paul and Usman to please thank the entire team and the team to thank Paul and Usman for taking care of this entire session. Thank you very much, Paul and Usman.
Thank you, everyone. Pleasure having you here.
Thank you, everyone, as well. Pleasure having you here. It's been a wonderful conversation. Back to you, Ray.
All right. So we have a minute left. I think we are done with all the questions. Fantastic questions from Gabby, fantastic questions from Carlos, Mama Zaida, responses from Varsha, Jennifer. It's wonderful to be in a multicultural context that we are in, and figuring out that sometimes we have the same problems. At times, though, we have to tweak our solutions a little bit, right? And with that lesson, thank you very much for your participation and your time. We hope to see you on November 2nd, 3rd, 4th during the PAL conference as well. Thank you very much. Have a great evening and goodbye.
So we will be discussing about 3 papers today. I will introduce the authors as we go, along with every paper. The first paper actually more talks about blending 2 different, I would say, frugal innovations and how they combine and work. The second one tries to bring back the keeping the one left behind of SDG. So keeping trying to bring back the out of school children, into the education system, but not just about them. It's a larger group. And the third paper that actually talked about how we can actually change the curriculum
Said, sorry to
with
interrupt.
the future in mind. So, and this is going to be a very interesting combination from, and looks like different audiences also. So without further ado, I would like to invite our speaker for the first paper. Now, the first paper, it combines two. So, Colibri is a platform. It's an open source platform that helps teacher, it facilitates learning and also has lots of tools.
Hello,
but also
Said.
at that time, yes.
Hello, Said. Sorry to interrupt, but Dennis, I think Varsha is going to do Spanish. Thank you, Said.
Oh, so should I start?
If you can hold on a second.
Yeah.
Dennis?
Yes. So now I have all of them. Let me we should be good now.
Estamos bem agora.
Perfect.
Perfeito.
So, for the first paper, it's titled Implementation for Teacher Training using TRL, Lessons Learned from Colombia. They use this Colibri model with the Pratham's teaching at the right level. And so this is going to be really interesting, how and if such shocks happens, how we can actually switch from this face-to-face method to kind of online tutoring.
El método en línea. Y yo quisiera invitar a Diana.
Catherine co-authors.
Esses são os coautores que terão 10 minutos para apresentar o papel. Muito obrigado. É o nosso prazer estar aqui convosco. Eu vou partilhar convosco o meu ecrã. Conseguem ver o meu ecrã? Perfeito. Portanto, eu sou Diana Soares e eu sou a diretora executiva e eu estou na organização baseada em Colômbia. Eu sou a Meredith Gray e eu acabo de concluir o meu mestrado, o meu grau de mestrado em desenvolvimento na Universidade de Sussex. E este ano eu estou a trabalhar na avaliação com piloto e muito obrigado por nos terem aqui. Muito obrigado. Para começar esta apresentação, gostaria de mostrar-vos esta imagem para que vocês possam compreender o que está a acontecer aqui. Isto é o que nós fizemos no ano passado. Os alunos na zona rural, eu vou traduzir isso a partir do espanhol. Desculpa, senhor professor, mas aqui esta é a nossa realidade, é o que nós tivemos no ano passado. Tivemos vários problemas relacionados com a educação. Por exemplo, nós sabemos que as escolas, o ensino não ocorre muito cedo, mas também existe uma necessidade urgente para que haja habilidades básicas para o estudo, que tem a ver com a literacia, a numeracia e a escrita, e não enfatiza a necessidade de implementar muitas metodologias. Por exemplo, a metodologia de ensinar em idades iniciais. Nós temos, por exemplo, temos desempenho baixo. Isso traz dificuldade em termos de aprendizagem. E existem áreas, cidades ou zonas rurais. Nós estamos a falar sobre as cidades. E conhecendo essa informação, para o momento nós não temos informação, por exemplo, sobre a educação nas cidades. Portanto, tendo isso em mente, o que nós fazemos aqui na Colômbia é implementar, nós adotamos a abordagem de ensino e aplicamos no nosso contexto. E não temos apenas isso traduzido para espanhol, mas também comparamos com os padrões nacionais. O que acontece é que nós não conseguimos ter acesso a essas comunidades. Portanto, a nossa inovação foi especificamente de implementar através de
plateforme, pas pour les enfants, mais plutôt former les formateurs sur cette approche. Cette année, nous avons évalué l'expérience de l'utilisateur.
Been implemented with 13 teachers in a rural school in Medellin.
Apesar de ser uma amostra pequena, mas o estudo permitiu-nos ter muita informação. Isso vai nos ajudar em ajustar esse instrumento. Para treinamento de mais professores. Portanto, para esta avaliação, nós seguimos a estrutura da educação, organizamos questões de pesquisa entre as categorias e temos evidência de promessas para considerar fatores sobre se os professores têm tido as habilidades para ensinar os níveis necessários. Olhamos também para a feasibilidade do instrumento para considerar questões tais como se o usuário experiencia, tem experimentado. E também incluímos que tipo de mudanças precisam de ser efetuadas, mesmo em termos também da estrutura lógica. E isso também envolve métodos de pesquisa qualitativa e quantitativa, e também dados qualitativos. E eu realizei entrevistas semi-estruturadas de modo a explorar a experiência dos professores em termos de treinamento político de forma flexível. É muito importante nós sabermos que o nosso objetivo em relação a essa amostra é que olhamos para aquilo que é a qualidade da aprendizagem, e isso parte do ponto de início para que possamos alcançar mais alunos e mais professores. Portanto, para compreender os resultados chaves, as constatações chaves, é preciso compreendermos a partir da implementação, e nós iniciamos a implementação nos finais de abril e fizemos isso durante o período do pico do Covid, tivemos lockdowns, mas sempre, quando não havia aulas em Coreia, isso foi um período violento. E nós tínhamos que ir às escolas e ir aos professores para termos informação. Portanto, é muito importante compreender que foi a partir deste ponto que nós decidimos ter o nosso modelo de configuração de campus. Portanto, é um ponto importante para nós compreendermos as constatações. E assim que nós usamos o método de configuração de política, temos tido problemas específicos com isso, porque por vezes a ligação de internet é necessário para fazer a configuração com os professores. E outro problema, por exemplo, às vezes não funciona com certos recursos e não tem sido ajustado de forma apropriada. Portanto, para a implementação nós temos que ter um modelo que nós possamos usar com a administração e configurar o modelo com. E, portanto, também nós sugerimos também, a partir do ponto de vista dos implementadores, que tenham essa forma de configuração em relação ao modelo usando o Colibri. E especificamente com esses professores, nós usamos os seus próprios dispositivos e também aprendemos disso. Por exemplo, alguns participantes não tinham dispositivos que satisfaziam os requisitos mínimos do Colibri. E, portanto, por isso nós usamos métodos alternativos, como por exemplo, para ter tudo no Google Drive, ou métodos alternativos ou ferramentas para nos ajudar a fazer face a esses problemas. E por isso nós usamos os dispositivos dos nossos participantes, porque no meu computador eu posso ver o problema. Portanto, nós recomendamos que se priorize o uso de dispositivos a nível da escola, ou deve-se fornecer tablets ou computadores. Mas, claro, isso tem implementações econômicas que devem ser consideradas. Também nós temos comentários dos professores acerca dos recursos de implementação, que por vezes aparece que não faz o download de forma correta. Portanto, isso também ajuda do contexto, do melhoramento do contexto. Portanto, agora vou falar um pouco sobre algumas das constatações-chave da minha pesquisa de dissertação. Portanto, uma das constatações principais tem a ver com o valor que esses professores atribuíram à experiência de colaboração em termos do Colibri. E por causa disso, impulsionar a aprendizagem na comunidade através de encontros colaborativos, e também o envolvimento dos professores ajudou, não ajuda apenas a melhorar aquilo que é a implementação dos professores, mas também pode-se usar outras metodologias, como por exemplo o ensino no nível apropriado, e também olhamos para aquilo que são as discussões, as reflexões. Isso também permite que eles criem melhores práticas até as começam. Também é importante saber que participantes e professores também tiveram em consideração o ensino ao nível apropriado e soluções apropriadas para lacunas apropriadas identificadas nas instituições, apesar das dificuldades que enfrentaram em termos tecnológicos, mas eles continuam a aprender e continuam a colaborar e a usar o Colibri nas suas escolhas. E finalmente, em termos de tecnologia, as minhas constatações indicam a importância de aumentar encontros cara a cara, mas isso apenas é permitido quando o contexto permite.
Offline.
E também vimos que o Colibri pode ser usado mesmo offline. Muito obrigado, Meredith. E também olhamos para a importância de avaliar. Esta implementação ajuda-nos, olhando também para aquilo que é a estrutura. No início não era possível ter esses encontros cara a cara, tínhamos encontros virtuais para realizarmos algumas práticas, mas também precisamos sempre de ter os professores envolvidos. Então, a importância desse método, métodos alternativos, para que possamos implementar essas metodologias. Portanto, esta é a referência que nós temos. Muito obrigado. Muito obrigado.
Very much. Our participants, please.
Said you are on mute. You are speaking but on mute, sorry.
Sorry, thank you.
N'avait pas un micro actif. C'était très intéressant comme présentation. Comme vous avez dit, les preuves sont très nécessaires. Et comment la collaboration marche. On doit aussi voir d'autres considérations, quelles sont les différentes approches qu'on peut utiliser à ce stade. J'aimerais inviter Peter Grover. Petit va faire une présentation et parler de ce qui a été fait en Inde. Progrès par CADEM. CADEM, ça veut dire étape. Donc on va se focaliser sur les enfants qui ont quelques
gaps of, in the primary school level.
Donc
focus on, this content.
Em termos de trabalho, portanto, está.
Are going to present. Fifi, the floor is yours.
Fifi, vous avez la parole. Saïd, merci, j'espère bien.
Thank you. So I'll begin now, and the focus of my presentation is a learning enhancement program which has been developed by Humana People to People India. It is for primary school children, and we call this as Progressing with Kadam in India. Kadam, as Saeed had rightly mentioned, is step. Able to move my slide.
You can take it down and then reshare.
Yeah. Okay, now it has come. I think there was some problem. So the picture that you see on your screen is the picture of the primary school education status in India. It is not the picture in the center that I'm talking about, but there are so many things which are written around the picture. The challenges are many, but we are focusing on two most important challenges that children in primary school faces. Either they are out of school, they need to be mainstream. Such are children who have never been to school or are school dropouts. And another challenge that we face is the learning gaps in children who are already enrolled in schools. So there have been a lot of activities, a lot of efforts which have been done in India. There is Right to Education Act, National Policy on Education, which has just been rolled out last year, SDG Goal 4 or SDG 4 of United Nations, Nitin Bharat. There's so many things, but the challenges still remain. A lot of groundwork need to be done. And now you see this is another picture. Of course, there is no picture here, but the view or the focus and the visuals are 8, which are very important. The challenges remain same. The first important problem or the challenge is that there is learning gap in children, and the need is to identify the learning gaps. Second, very important is to close the learning gaps so that all children are at appropriate age level and at appropriate learning level. Third challenge is that we still need to accept and encourage that learning at individual pace of the child is the most important. Fourth is the cognitive enhancement so that future new concepts can be retained by the child. Important is also, fifth, is that there is social and emotional well-being of the child which has to be considered. Sixth, another important thing is to instill learning responsibility so that this becomes a way of life and the child knows how to take on a learning anytime in the future. Seventh is that involving parents and community in the learning process really helps. It makes it safe, easy, and easily doable also. Tracking the retention is again last but not the least. Because whatever may happen, we need to make sure that these children do not drop out again from school. So actually, you can see that the focus is on here in Ethiopia.
Está aquí muy grande de niños que vienen.
O ponto de foco é que tudo aquilo que nós usamos deve ser viável, porque ainda é um país muito grande e a educação para as crianças ainda é muito baixa e ainda existem alguns casos.
Low or no. Multi-graded classrooms have to be ascertained, and every teacher needs to know that it might be one grade, but the children might be at different levels. To address and to bridge the learning gaps, accelerated learning is the call for the day. Holistic development of children is very important because we have to see that children get the cognitive, emotional, and social development alongside. Experiential learning really helps because real life focuses on effective learning and effective retention of learning. Peer learning is very important because children learn better with their own group, and peer learning also develops the social bonding in children, inculcates teamwork, etc. Self-driven learning, if that happens, then the children become drivers of their own learning. So there are other people who are focusing on children, but that intrinsic motivation really helps the children to move forward. Adaptive assessments are important because assessments, if they are individualized, really work well, and we can immediately pick up the gap therein then and refer to it. Age-appropriate school integration and retention have already spoken about, and this is why Humana People to People India developed a program called Kadam, and Kadam focuses on the learning enhancement of primary school children. So here I will just talk about the 3 primary principles of Kadam methodology, which are knowledge, action, and encouragement. So knowledge is when I know what my present status is. Now my present status is to be known by the child and by the teacher. So it is where I am and where I have to reach. That is what my target is. Action is how to successfully implement the learning process, reach my targets with the help of some tools and techniques which are already part of the program module. Encouragement makes the learning
sostenido. Se habló son los elementos de cada más importante es en la evaluación de línea de base. Si la evaluación es buena, entonces el punto de entrada, sabiendo cuál es su nivel actual y la colaboración de todos los actores, comunidades, padres, Estado, es muy importante para avanzar el proceso. Todos los colaboradores deben saber cuál es el estado de aprendizaje y que haya monitoreo. Y claro, se hayan los elementos de es aprendizaje equilibrado. Básicamente, eligiendo competencias para el niño. Y que efectivamente sea más fuerte para el niño. Este aprendizaje acelerado se refiere al número de niños que va a acabar más actividades. Y los niños pueden hacer esas cosas, son pequeños o individualmente. Y el segundo elemento importante es el aprendizaje holístico, porque eso ayuda a los niños.
Cognitive learning. So what?
El aprendizaje. Planificamos actividades sobre un tema cada mes. Un aprendizaje temático que aprende cosas más allá del
They need to
cette responsabilité en tant qu'être humain.
exercise.
Também tem que haver avaliação e depois temos a lista de verificação, temos exercícios para verificar as competências e as competências. Vem que as crianças devem ler as suas competências e ler aquilo que são os exercícios e depois ver as competências e voltam para as competências para que possam satisfazer aquilo que são os resultados da aprendizagem. Desculpa por interromper. Okay, vamos reduzir a nossa velocidade para que os intérpretes possam. Assim. Temos aqui o segundo ponto, que é o micro rastreio. É um cartão que tem todas as disciplinas e todas as competências de resultados da aprendizagem de uma disciplina. E temos isto que são feitos em círculos. Portanto, na medida que a criança vai trabalhando com ele vai circulando. E cada disciplina em que a criança tem, então, vai vendo o seu progresso e pode ser visualizado através dos cartões. E nós cremos que essa aprendizagem é muito importante, porque as crianças não estão diretamente sempre com o professor, mas em algum momento ficam um pouco distantes, mas estão lá. Então, o que nós fizemos é agrupar as crianças em pequenos grupos, podem ser grupos de 3. Existem algumas atividades que podem ser feitas em pequenos grupos de 3, ou podemos ter outras atividades que podem ser realizadas em 2 grupos de 3. Isso também traz coordenação e cooperação, que ajuda muito naquilo que é o desenvolvimento social das crianças. E nós individualizamos isso, visto que nós já cobrimos competências, e nós vimos que a criança deve aprender, deve aceder a mais aprendizagem. E, portanto, as crianças podem ter cerca de 80% nos seus testes. Portanto, olhando para os 80%, nós ainda voltamos que é para verificar aquilo que está sendo dado à criança, para podermos compreender melhor. Portanto, isso torna-se individualizado. E em termos do engajamento, temos que ver quantos encontros são realizados nas salas de aulas. Temos as crianças sentadas na sala de aula e vemos como é que elas planificam os seus exercícios, como planificam a sua semana que vem, a próxima semana, como é que realizam as suas atividades. Depois de 3 meses, nós temos as crianças organizando todas as coisas. E, portanto, tudo aquilo que eles fizeram, nós convidamos os seus pais, os membros da família, para que possam ver. E, às vezes eles fazem alguns ensaios, e fazem alguns cartazes e pronto, tornam a escola muito convidativa. Então, isto é o que cada pai e cada criança quer ver. Então, isso fizemos no último sábado de cada mês. Portanto, este é um programa que tem sido mapeado e tem sido usado nacionalmente. E temos ali um órgão nacional que olha para aquilo que é a aprendizagem a nível do país. E temos a Política Nacional de Educação, que é a nova política, que também já olha para aquilo que é o desenvolvimento do programa. Claro que o programa está baseado no currículo nacional. E podem ver a informação que está no vosso ecrã, do lado direito. Temos ali as crianças que são categorizadas de primeira até a 5ª classe. É a lista de verificação que tem a ver com as competências que as crianças concluem. E existe um livro que é dado às crianças e tem lá os testes para todas as classes. E também temos lá o cartão de verificação do desempenho da criança, e também existem outros livros, e um dos livros mais importantes é o livro-chave que o professor usa para ver aquilo que são as atividades e também a implementação do programa para as crianças. E se o professor decidir também quer implementar outra atividade para as crianças, também pode fazê-lo. E, portanto, neste livro nós registramos todas as atividades que o professor realiza na sala de aula. E o meu último slide praticamente aborda aspectos básicos fundamentais do programa. Flagship é um programa para as crianças, um programa nacional. Portanto, é importante que as crianças, a uma idade apropriada a nível da escola, e também está focado no que é aprendizagem na escola. E também temos lá os sustentadores da aprendizagem, e também olha para aquilo que é a aprendizagem futura. E esse programa começou em 2014 e foi implementado.
Ariana 2016.
Where we were supposed to bring 30,000 children into mainstream education, and we could get in 3 years 35,000. So we actually, did better than what was required. And now Haryana is in the second phase because they want to eliminate the word out of school children. Kadam's outreach has been over 80,000 out of school children who have been successfully integrated in age appropriate grades, and over 70,000 primary school children have successfully narrowed their learning gaps. With this, I end my presentation. Thank you so much for having me over.
Thank you very much, Preeti, particularly highlighting at this very moment, frugal solutions, keeping in mind the hard-to-reach community with low internet accesses, and also showing that how through your baseline assessment and collaborative approach and community partnership and peer learning, you are focusing on this. Bringing the left behind children into the education process again. We are a bit running out of time, so I will just very quickly now go back to our third and the last presentation. And it's also a natural progression. If we talked about what needs to be focused on and everything, and from that perspective, the next paper is going to focus on implementing preschool curriculum through indigenous pedagogies. I would request Gunhill and Mariam to introduce yourselves, and you have 10 minutes for the presentation.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Said. I will share my screen. No. There you go. Yes, thank you so much, and hello everyone. My name is Gunhild Branne Bjørnstad. I'm associate professor at the College University of Østfold in Norway. I'm teaching drama and theater as pedagogies and aesthetic learning processes. So that's my approach to learning. And with me, I have Dr. Miriam. Maybe you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello everyone. I am Mariam Ismail from the State University of Zanzibar, which is located in Tanzania, East Africa, and I'm a teacher educationist. Thank you.
We have together started a project that we call the NUZA project, Norway and Zanzibar project, which is a project that aims to strengthen the competences of teachers in intercultural or multicultural classrooms. So that was our starting point. And then when our project finally started getting everything finalized and planned, COVID hit, and we couldn't do our exchanges the way we were expecting to. So what happened was that we found out that what we need to do is to come together on and find common interests in research. And in Zanzibar at that time, or now, they're starting to implement a new curriculum for preschools. So me and Miriam found this common interest in the preschool curriculum and decided to start our project. And I have to underline that this is a start of a project that has not really been, we haven't gotten that far yet. And I see a lot of the presentations present a lot of results. We are not there yet, but maybe next time. So this, that's the background of our presentation today. I don't know, Miriam, if you could say something more about the curriculum maybe and the revision.
Yeah, I'll just say shortly because we only have 10 minutes. And maybe I have to say that the implementation of curriculum in Zanzibar is not yet implemented. It is in the review process. Previously, in pre-primary school, we used to have like a kind of content-based curriculum whereby students were, learning many subjects. So you could see a young kid maybe carrying a big bag. I think it's normal maybe in most African countries, like 8 to maybe 10. And when they go to school, they also have to learn Kiswahili as the mother tongue, but also they are introduced into Arabic and English also. So there is a lot of subject and content. So this time around, the government have decided to move to theme-based curriculum. And under the theme-based curriculum, there are just a few themes to help kids with numeracy, literacy, some environment, and like something to do with science and technology, and some few things around. So it's still in the review process. The book are not yet to help teachers are not yet been designed, but it's under the stakeholders review and sharing with different stakeholders in education to support the transition, like to move from content-based to theme-based. Hopefully by 2022, it will be ready for implementation in some schools. Thank you.
Yes, so this led to, I'm sorry, home office. Hang on, my daughter is coming. All right.
We are talking about children's learning here, so please.
Well, this led us to when we see that the curriculum that is being suggested. When we saw that the suggested curriculum takes this topic-based approach and also addresses the play-based pedagogy as a strategy for learning, we got interested in what kind of play-based pedagogies are they suggesting, because what we see...
Ganghel, I am going to actually give you some time. If you please don't mind, please, I would appreciate that if you actually give some time there.
I'll just let her...
Please, yeah, please feel free.
You can carry her to be on the screen. Maybe it will be easier.
Meanwhile, I already see some very interesting good questions here. Please do type in your questions. And also, there are some questions that has very, maybe probably quick answers. May I request the authors to go through the chat box, because we started the session late. I'm afraid that we may have a very little time for the question answer session. So if you quickly go through the questions, the authors of the first two sessions, and please feel free if you have some brief answers there, and we will definitely get a chance to explain them. but in case we run out of time.
Sorry about that. That's how it is these days. What I was saying is that when we see that the topic-based approaches and the play-based pedagogies are the focus of this new curriculum, we were interested in what kind of play-based approaches do they actually promote, because what some of the research that we have found suggests that when these kind of play-based approaches are introduced, they very often introduce more of a conventional or a Western play approach, instead of using a lot of the potentials that are in the indigenous play-based approaches. So that's what we want to study in our research project. As I said, we haven't gotten that far yet, just starting off. So what we present today is more or less a very brief literature review that we have conducted. Yes, as Miriam was saying, that the curriculum is still under revision. So what we have, we don't really have the curriculum yet, but we have the needs assessment and we have a policy briefing saying something about the intentions of the revision of the curriculum. And then we did a search on indigenous play-based pedagogies, trying to find words that we could use, because what we see is that there are so many different words that are in use when it comes to pedagogies and play-based approaches. So we tried with a couple of different search words, and our key findings then were that when we looked at the assessment of the needs and the policy brief, then it says nothing about indigenous pedagogies. There's no mention of it, but they do say something about learning lifelong learning skills and creativity, and that the topic, the reason for the topic-based approach is that they want the children to have a broader understanding. When it comes to the indigenous pedagogies, as I said, many of the research articles say that the Western games or the conventional games are used as educational games in teaching, while the indigenous games are more used during playtime as a way of just recreation. So the indigenous games have a potential there for actually being used also as pedagogies for learning or teaching. One of the important things about using the indigenous pedagogies, as the literature points out, is the awareness and the pride of cultural heritage and the sense of forming an identity, also for the children, that these are games and physical games and also educational games that they recognize from maybe their parents or their grandfathers. The community is based around a lot of these pedagogies, and in Zanzibar, it's a melting pot of different cultures. So we need to strengthen the cultural heritage and the pride in the cultural heritage. Miriam, you have to stop me if I talk too fast. What we see is that there is definitely a need to explore these potentials in Zanzibar, because hasn't been focus yet. So what we think that our research might have of implications is a chance to highlight the competences that are already there, the tacit knowledge of the teachers, that just bringing the awareness of these pedagogies, that they can actually be used. And also, hopefully, that we can also help to influence the implementation of this new curriculum through when they actually do the implementations now, as soon as they start doing it. That's what we hope. We would like to do some interviews about the preschool teachers' practice. What do they actually do? We hope to be able to observe and also explore and analyze the diversity of these play-based approaches in Zanzibar, because we do believe that there are many that we haven't even thought about yet. So that's our intention for this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ganghild, and thank you very much, Mariam. Giving it at the time, we could actually have a Q&A session now, as a very quickly short Q&A session. I would actually invite our co-chair, Thatolet Somo from Young Love, to run the Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Said, and thank you so much all the presenters for the wonderful presentation, and I think very informative. There are a few questions that have been put through on our chat, and like John has said, the presentations will also be shared, will be compiled and shared with everyone as the participants have requested. There is one question that, because I think some of the questions for presenters one have been answered on the chat by the presenters, so I will just refer probably one or two questions that have been shared or referred to presenter to Pretty with their presentation, if the Karama was aligned to the national curriculum or it's a separate intervention, and also probably we are curious to learn more if or to hear if there were goal settings for the interventions, and also if there were kind of like if the learners were tracked, like their progression were tracked individually, or they were kind of like a set targets for growth. In general, how does that happen? So if probably Pretty, you can share with us probably in 2 to 3 minutes about the question.
Señora Pretty, para poder partilhar conosco em 2 ou 3 minutos.
Es básicamente
by Humana only, but it has its background and its setting is on all the national curriculum frameworks. For example, if we take learning outcomes, then it is the learning outcomes which are based on NCRT, which is a national level learning outcome forum, which provides it for all the schools in India. Also, it is based on what has been transpired in the new education policy, which has come out last year. So a lot of things, most of the things for out-of-school children and primary school children learning enhancement have been taken from there. Going to your second question, where learners become the drivers of their own learning. First of all, we believe that self-pacing is very important. So definitely the entire program might be conducted in a classroom or implemented in a classroom, but individual child knows what his or her individual learning level is and what his or her individual target reach is. So the entry and exit point for each child in the classroom differs according to their own learning level. So that has been kept in mind. And the tools and techniques are so created and so done in the program that every child is able to track the learning. Because the tools are there, the child is going to be on that tool, and definitely the learning progression will be visible not only to the child and the teacher, but to all the stakeholders, because through MIS, there is regular MIS after 3 months, which is shared to all the stakeholders at the state level, district level. So that is also, and even all the partners who are working in the field. So that also is done. So definitely the program may be done or implemented in the classroom, but it is a self-paced program, and every child has its own learning targets.
Thank you so much, Peter. I believe, Virginia, your question have been answered, and I think even some who had the same, who were asking themselves the same question. I don't know if there is anyone who have a burning question, because we are also looking at time. And thank you so much again, Ganheld, for your presentation, and totally understandable on the disturbance. I think it's a new normal. Those are some of the things that you are also looking into, and we totally understand and accommodate, I will say, all that. So thank you so much for that. I think because of time, I would like to stop here unless there is a burning question. Based on what is happening in Zanzibar, is there? Oh, okay. There is a question also. I think maybe I will give kind of like a minute for the response. Virginia is also asking about, based on what is happening in Zanzibar, is there likelihood that indigenous pedagogies will be incorporated? Because you have also talked about the implementation has not yet started, and I think all of us are looking forward to hear more about the future implementation. Are there any intentions of including indigenous pedagogies?
Yes, I would like to respond to that. Yes, there is an intention to include indigenous pedagogies. Actually, I am in the team. I've been invited to kind of support the team, which is doing this process, the Zanzibar Institute of Education. And even though they're not really actually using the word indigenous pedagogy, probably not many people are aware of indigenous pedagogy. For example, I have seen one practice whereby I think everyone knows, we used to say, Simon say stop, and then people just change it to be using a local name, like for example, Mariam say stop. So, but what we want, in Zanzibar, we have our own plays, our own games, indigenous games. For example, we used to play Mdako, something called Mdako, whereby you use 12 stones and then you throw and then put in and out, doing like you are subtracting or adding. So those are indigenous games whereby students are still learning, or learners are learning how to count in a very playful way. So this is what we are trying to kind of including inside, so that we kind of avoiding just using, like games which is coming from abroad, rather than our own indigenous games which we have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mariam, and your partner on the response. And thank you so much, all the presenters. Because of time, I believe we'll stop here, and over to you, Said.
Thank you very much. So we should go back to the session soon. So just two things. One, I love the way different elements came together in this whole session. So how we bring up, and it feels like, how we bring up from here the indigenous pedagogy. So it's like we talk about learning through play, but I think this the combination of indigenous pedagogies with this is really excellent, because it brings a synergy between the text and the context. Because sometimes, with the play from other countries, sometimes the kids miss the context. So it's very interesting and very good. So thank you, everyone. Thank you all the presenters. Everyone, please note that the conference is from 2 to 4.
Por favor, para todos, notem que
the approach that you are suggesting, that sharing, inviting, collaborative, please do share the call for this, the invitation of the conference to your peers, and we all look forward to seeing you there. We will probably now...
Para vos vermos na próxima conferência.
Thank you so much, Said. And
muito obrigado. Vamos.
But for the session facilitators, there's a different link into your emails. But really to thank all of us who've taken time to engage, present.
Do encontro temos outro link.
Thank you, everyone. Lovely evening, lovely afternoon, and morning.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.